Hey there, tonight, we're not just looking at history, we're stepping directly into one of the most profoundly dramatic and transformative periods in the annals of English history. We're journeying back nearly 1,000 years to a pivotal era, an age of iron and upheaval, to understand, with visceral clarity, precisely why it was an utterly brutal and soul-crushing experience to be a Saxon during the relentless Norman Conquest. This isn't just a dry chronicle of dates and battles. It's a living tale of savage invasion, unimaginable hardship, and a seismic cultural shift that didn't just reshape England. It forged the very essence of the nation we know today. But before we fully surrender to the echoes of the past, take a brief moment to connect. If you find genuine value and enjoyment in these historical explorations, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always a small, fascinating window into our global community. Now, if you're ready, let's set the scene. Dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that subtle, distant hum, and let the modern world fade as we ease ourselves into tonight's epic journey together. Congratulations! You've just awoken in the unforgiving dawn of the year 1066. The morning air, though crisp and biting, carries the comforting scent of wood smoke, a lingering perfume from the hearth fire that dwindled to embers through the long, dark hours of the night. You find yourself nestled within the rough-hewn timbers of a small wooden house, its roof a thick, insulating blanket of tightly woven thatch, in a modest village quietly sleeping just outside the bustling, ancient city of York in the rugged expanse of northern England. The good news, the truly remarkable fortune, is that you are alive and well, a sturdy inhabitant of what is, by many measures, one of the wealthiest and most stable kingdoms in all of Western Europe. The bad news, however, is a cold dread in your gut. Everything, every single thing you know and hold dear, is about to be irrevocably changed. With a groan, you stretch, your muscles stiff from the night, and rise from your simple straw-filled mattress, laid upon a rudimentary wooden frame. Your thick woolen blanket, though a faithful companion against the encroaching chill, is no match for the keen morning air, prompting you to reach quickly for your clothing. You are, by the standards of your time and place, a middle-class Saxon, not a landowning lord, certainly, but far from the impoverished peasants who toil without true ownership of the soil beneath their feet. First, a linen undershirt, its fabric rough-spun but a familiar comfort against your skin, followed by a heavier woolen tunic that descends to your knees, providing essential warmth. This cloth, you know, was painstakingly woven by the diligent women of your household during the long, dark days of winter, their fingers adept at the loom. Around your waist, a sturdy leather belt is fastened, from which hangs a small, ever-present knife, an indispensable tool for a myriad of tasks, from carving a morsel of roasted meat to whittling wood for a new handle. Your wife, ever the early riser, is already up and moving, coaxing the central hearth fire back to life. Its rekindled flames cast flickering, orange shadows across the packed earth floor, serving as both the village's primary source of warmth and the cornerstone of its culinary needs. Smoke, thick and gray, billows upward towards a carefully crafted hole in the thatched roof, though much of it inevitably lingers within the confines of the small home, making your eyes sting with a familiar, mild irritation. You are long accustomed to it, a small price for the heat that wards off the damp cold. The floor beneath your bare feet is the same packed earth, now scattered with fresh rushes, their subtle fragrance a small attempt to absorb the day's grime and keep the dwelling somewhat clean. In a far corner, your two children still lie in the deep embrace of sleep, huddled together on their shared pallet, their small forms barely visible in the dim light. Hungry? Your wife asks, her voice soft, already knowing the inevitable answer as she turns, a wooden bowl brimming with steaming porridge in her hands. Made from oats, its earthy flavor is elevated by a precious spoonful of honey, a rare luxury. There is no sugar in your world. Honey is the sole sweetener available, and its value is immense, a testament to the buzzing industry of the bees and the careful tending of hives. You take the bowl and a wooden spoon, savoring the warm, comforting simplicity of the food. Did you hear about the comet? You ask your wife between mouthfuls, the thought having weighed on your mind since before dawn. Everyone in the market is talking about it. She nods gravely, her eyes reflecting a shared apprehension. A bad omen, they say, she replies, her voice hushed. The old women, with their wisdom and their fears, mutter that it means trouble is coming. Great trouble. Indeed, in April of this very year, a truly spectacular, yet deeply unsettling, sight had blazed across the heavens, a celestial visitor that we now recognize as Halley's Comet. To the people of your time, steeped in superstition and divine portents, it was an absolutely terrifying omen, a blazing sign from God himself, signaling that monumental, earth-shattering changes were on the horizon. Little did you, or anyone else, truly comprehend just how devastatingly right those fears would prove to be. The year 1066 had already been tumultuous, an eddying whirlpool of uncertainty. Back in January, King Edward the Confessor, a pious monarch who had ruled for over 2 decades, had finally succumbed to illness. Edward, devout but childless, had left behind a kingdom plunged into a precarious state of uncertain succession. The throne was swiftly claimed by Harold Godwin's son, an immensely powerful and charismatic earl who asserted that Edward had, on his deathbed, named him as his rightful heir. But Harold's claim was not undisputed. Across the English Channel, in the Duchy of Normandy, William, a fiercely ambitious and cunning duke, insisted that Edward had years earlier promised him the crown, a claim he was now, ominously, ready to enforce. You, like most in your isolated village, had heard the fragmented news through the occasional travelers and merchants who passed through, their tales often exaggerated, their information incomplete. For the most part, the daily concerns of tending your small plot of land, trading your wares at the local market, and ensuring your family had enough to eat, far outweighed any anxieties about who happened to sit on the distant throne in London. The king, whoever he might be, seemed a remote figure, utterly disconnected from the rhythm of your everyday life. Yet, the whispers of possible invasion, first faint, then growing steadily louder, had begun to penetrate even your quiet corner of the world. William of Normandy, you knew, was descended from those fearsome Vikings who had long ago settled in northern France, carving out their own powerful territory. The Normans, you'd heard, were a fierce, disciplined, and ruthlessly ambitious people, not so different, in essence, from the very Vikings who had once plagued England's shores, though they now spoke French and had embraced many continental customs. As you finish the last spoonful of your simple breakfast, the distant, resonant peal of the church bell drifts across the village, a familiar signal echoing through the morning air. It's time. Time to head to your work. You are a blacksmith, a position of considerable skill and respect within the village, a master of fire and metal. Your forge stands a short distance from your home, a humble but solid structure with thick stone walls and an open front, where the roaring heart of your furnace breathes life into raw metal day in and day out. I'll be back by midday. You call to your wife, who nods, her attention already turning to rousing the children for their morning chores. The short walk to your forge takes you through the heart of your village, a collection of similar wooden houses, most crowned with their distinctive thatched roofs, arranged somewhat organically along a winding dirt road. At its very center stands the small stone church, the only structure of its kind, a beacon of permanence amidst the more ephemeral wooden dwellings. Around it, the village unfurls without the rigid, grid-like planning that the Romans, centuries ago, had imposed on their towns. Instead, it grew naturally, responding to the land and the needs of its people. Already, the village is stirring with the gentle hum of early morning activity. Women drawing water from the communal well, its bucket chains creaking softly. Men shouldering their tools and heading towards the fields. Children, still sleepy-eyed, tending to chickens scratching for breakfast or pigs snuffling in their pens. You exchange brief, familiar greetings with your neighbors as you pass, a quiet affirmation of shared existence. In your Saxon world, community is not just a concept, it is everything, the very fabric of survival. Everyone knows everyone else, their lives interwoven by deep ties of mutual obligation and assistance, a silent pact against the unpredictable world. At your forge, the first order of business is always to rekindle the fire, coaxing the dying embers back to a roaring, consuming blaze. Today, you need to forge a batch of strong nails for a new barn currently under construction and, later, to repair a plowshare that broke yesterday, a vital tool for the harvest. It's detailed, demanding work, a craft you've mastered over years of arduous apprenticeship and countless hours of practice, shaping hard metal to your will. Soon, the rhythmic clang of your heavy hammer striking hot iron will fill the air, a familiar symphony of labor. As you work, sweat already beading on your brow in the fierce heat of the forge, a rider passes through the village. He stops briefly to water his horse at the communal trough near your workshop. You recognize him. He's a messenger for the local thane, the Saxon nobleman who holds authority and dispenses justice over this area, a vital link in the feudal chain. Any news? You ask casually, setting aside your hammer for a moment, wiping your grimy hands on a cloth. The rider's face is grim, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his tidings. King Harold has gathered the FYRD, he says, his voice strained. The Norwegians have invaded in the north, landed on our shores. This is deeply troubling news. The FYRD is the militia, a levy made up of free men, farmers, craftsmen, all able-bodied men, who can be called to fight when the kingdom is threatened. If the king is calling them up, the threat must be truly dire. A cold knot forms in your stomach. You know you, too, might be summoned. All able-bodied men, regardless of station, can be required to serve. How soon? You ask, your mind racing, already thinking of your unfinished work, your family, their safety. They've already landed. The messenger replies, his words clipped. Harold is marching north now with all haste. And there are dark rumors that the Norman Duke might use this chance, with our army diverted, to land in the south. 2 invasions at once. That would be utterly catastrophic, an impossible burden for an already strained kingdom. You thank the messenger for the news, your heart heavy, as he spurs his horse on, riding to spread the urgent word to the next village. Your day continues with the familiar rhythm of the forge, but your mind is no longer focused. It is troubled, churning with a rising tide of dread. By midday, you return home, the smell of wood smoke and hot metal clinging to your clothes. You find your wife outside your house, overseeing the slow, comforting process of baking bread in the clay oven, its earthy warmth radiating outwards. Your children are helping her, the older one diligently kneading dough with small, practiced hands, while the younger gathers sticks for the fire, his tiny arms laden with fuel. The FYRD has been called. You tell her quietly, your voice low, careful that the children, engrossed in their tasks, don't fully comprehend the gravity of your words. Harold of Norway has invaded. Her face pales instantly, the color draining away. Will you have to go? She asks, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know yet. You reply, trying to project a calm you don't feel. Perhaps the Thane will need me to stay and make weapons instead. As a skilled craftsman, you reason, you might be more valuable forging swords and arrowheads for others than wielding one yourself. But nothing, absolutely nothing, feels certain anymore. The next few days pass with a mounting, palpable tension that hangs heavy in the village air. News, piecemeal and often contradictory, trickles in from weary travelers and anxious merchants. King Harold, it is said, marched his army north with incredible, almost superhuman speed, covering vast distances in a relentless forced march. On September 25th, he confronted the combined Norwegian forces and the rebellious English contingent led by his own brother, Tostig, at a place called Stamford Bridge. Against seemingly insurmountable odds, the exhaustion of his troops, the ferocity of the Norsemen, the English won a truly decisive and brutal victory. Harold Hardrada, the formidable Norwegian king, was slain, along with Harold's treacherous brother, Tostig. A resounding cheer, a collective sigh of relief, erupts in the village alehouse when this triumphant news finally arrives. England is safe. The Saxon king has proven himself a worthy, heroic leader, protecting his people from yet another wave of invaders. But your relief, like a fragile reed in a storm, is agonizingly short-lived. Just 3 agonizing days after the hard-won victory at Stamford Bridge, before the English army could even fully recover, William of Normandy makes his move. He lands on the south coast with a massive, well-equipped invasion force, a terrifying host of knights, archers, and infantry. The English army, utterly exhausted from their lightning-fast forced march north and the brutal battle they've just fought, now faces an impossible task. They must turn around and march hundreds of grueling miles south to confront this new, even greater threat. King Harold, a man of astonishing resolve, doesn't hesitate. He immediately turns his battle-hardened forces south, leading the vanguard with his elite household troops, the famed housecarls. These are not ordinary militiamen. They are professional soldiers, highly trained and fiercely loyal, unlike the FYRD, which is made up of ordinary men like you. The housecarls, armed with their deadly, two-handed battle axes, are renowned and feared fighters, capable of cleaving both man and horse in a single, devastating blow. As the king embarks on his desperate march south, word reaches your village that all able-bodied men should join the fight. The Thane himself, a man usually distant, rides into your village, personally selecting men to join the rapidly gathering forces. To your immense relief, he agrees that your skills are more valuable at the forge, making weapons, than carrying one onto the battlefield. Your hammer, once a symbol of craft and livelihood, now rings with a renewed, grim purpose as you tirelessly forge arrowheads and repair mail shirts, the clang of metal echoing late into the night. The entire village holds its breath, waiting, praying for news. Women gather anxiously at the well, their voices hushed, sharing worries about their husbands and sons who have joined the FYRD. Children, oblivious to the true horror of war, play at battles with sticks for swords, too young to truly comprehend the real, mortal dangers swirling around them. Then, on October 14th, 1066, a date that will forever be seared into the memory of England, the two armies meet on a ridge near Hastings, on the south coast. You will only learn the harrowing details much, much later, through fragmented, traumatized accounts. But on that single, pivotal day, everything, the entire course of your life, your family's future, England's destiny, changes. King Harold, understanding the tactical advantage of high ground, takes a defensive position atop Senlac Hill. His men quickly form a formidable shield wall, a tightly packed, impenetrable line of warriors, their heavy, round shields overlapping, presenting a bristling, seemingly unbreakable barrier to any attacker. The Saxons, as is their ancient tradition, are fighting entirely on foot, relying on their sheer discipline and the brutal effectiveness of their axes. The Normans, in stark contrast, are renowned for their fearsome cavalry, knights on horseback, clad in gleaming chain mail, wielding long, deadly lances, their charges designed to shatter any defensive line. The battle begins with Norman archers firing volleys of arrows uphill, a relentless rain of death, but the Saxon shield wall, stoic and unwavering, holds firm. When William sends his infantry to attack, they make little to no progress against the unyielding wall of shields and axes. Then he commits his formidable cavalry, but even these mounted knights, despite their terrifying charges, struggle to break through the disciplined Saxon line. At one critical point, a rumor, like wildfire, spreads through the Norman ranks. Duke William has been killed. Seeing some Normans retreating in disarray, a fatal mistake is made. Some eager Saxon fighters, sensing victory, break from their shield wall position to pursue them, eager for plunder and glory. William, very much alive, quickly raises his helmet to reveal his face to his panicked men, his presence rallying his wavering forces. The pursuing Saxons, now isolated from the main body of the shield wall, are swiftly surrounded and brutally cut down. William, a brilliant and adaptable commander, changes tactics. He orders his archers to fire high into the air, causing arrows to rain down from above onto the exposed heads and shoulders of the Saxons within the shield wall, an unceasing, agonizing assault. As the long, bloody day wears on, the Saxon line, though still valiant, begins to thin, their numbers dwindling under the relentless pressure. In the late afternoon, King Harold himself is struck down, according to popular legend, by an arrow through his eye, though the precise truth may never be known for certain. With their charismatic leader fallen, the heart of the Saxon resistance crumbles. Back in your village, the agonizing wait for news stretches on, seemingly endless. Days pass, filled only with fragmented rumors, whispers of unimaginable events. Then, like ghosts, survivors begin to straggle back, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow, bringing with them the devastating, undeniable truth: the king is dead. The battle is lost. England, the proud Saxon kingdom, has fallen to the Norman invaders. At first, life in your northern village continues much as before. The Norman army, focused on securing the south, hasn't yet reached this far north. William is proclaimed King of England, a coronation held with great pomp and ceremony in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066, but his actual control extends only to the south and southeast. For the moment, your daily routine remains unchanged, a fragile illusion of continuity. But you know, with a chilling certainty, that this won't last. The Norman Conquest, far from over, has only just begun its slow, inexorable march across the land. Winter settles over the land once more, its bitter cold seeping through the rough-hewn walls of your home, chilling you to the bone despite the hearth fire that burns day and night. Food is carefully, meticulously rationed, each portion measured with anxious precision. Winter is always a lean time, a period of scarcity, with stored grain and carefully salted meat forming the main sustenance until spring brings forth new growth. Your children, oblivious to the full weight of the new reality, play with simple wooden toys you've carved for them: a miniature horse, a small knight, a tiny, blunt sword. Your wife, by the flickering firelight, spins wool, the drop spindle twirling hypnotically as she works, her movements a soothing rhythm amidst the silent worry. Outside, a pristine blanket of snow dusts the thatched roofs of the village, transforming the familiar muddy road into a path of ethereal white. In these quiet moments, it's almost possible to forget the profound upheaval that has begun to shake the foundations of your world. But whispers, carried by the few brave travelers who dare to brave the treacherous winter roads, tell tales of grim changes unfolding in the south. Norman knights are being granted vast tracts of land that once belonged to Saxon nobles, dispossessing them with brutal efficiency. New, unfamiliar laws, written in a foreign tongue, are being imposed with an iron fist. Those who dare to resist, you hear, are dealt with harshly, their defiance met with merciless retribution. You lie awake at night, wondering with a gnawing fear what this will truly mean for your quiet village, for your beloved family, for your entire way of life. The Saxons have faced conquests before, the Romans, the Vikings, and have always, somehow, endured, absorbing their conquerors, adapting, surviving. But something deep inside you whispers that this time is different. The Normans aren't just raiders looking for plunder or settlers seeking new lands. They are here to stay, to rule, to fundamentally transform England into something entirely new, something alien and unrecognizable. As you finally drift off to sleep that night, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, you can't help but feel that the familiar world you've known all your life, the very ground beneath your feet, is slowly but irrevocably slipping away, like shadows retreating before the cold, indifferent dawn. The new year, 1067, arrives with little of the customary celebration. Usually, There would be joyous feasting and merrymaking to mark midwinter, the longest night having passed. But the mood this year is somber, heavy with unspoken fears. Even the traditional Twelfth Night festivities are subdued, with people gathering in smaller, quieter groups, speaking in hushed tones about what might come next, their voices laced with apprehension. You continue your work at the forge, a desperate anchor in a turbulent sea. However, orders for farm tools have dwindled noticeably, a reflection of the pervasive uncertainty. Instead, more and more people are requesting weapons, sturdy knives, sharp spearheads, anything that might offer a shred of protection in these increasingly perilous times. You don't ask questions, you simply fulfill the requests as best you can, your hammer echoing the grim preparations of your neighbors. One crisp morning in early spring, as the first tenacious green shoots begin to push through the thawing soil in the village gardens, a lone rider appears on the road. He is clearly not a local. His clothing is different, more elaborate and finely woven than anything you're used to seeing. He rides directly to the village reeve, the man responsible for overseeing the village affairs and, crucially, collecting taxes, speaking to him in halting English, heavily accented, a strange cadence to his words. Word spreads through the village like wildfire. He is a Norman, a representative of your new overlords, come to assess the village and its worth. The conquest, slowly but surely, is moving north. The Norman rides around, a stern, unsmiling figure, making careful notes on a piece of parchment that crinkles in his gloved hands. He asks a barrage of questions about the land, the number of households, what livestock is kept, the quality of the soil. The villagers answer cautiously, their voices low, unsure what information might later be used against them. Before he leaves, the Norman announces, his voice devoid of sympathy, that a new tax will be collected soon. It is significantly higher than what you ever paid to your Saxon lords. Mutters of discontent ripple through the gathered villagers, a low hum of resentment, but no one dares to speak out openly against the foreign decree. They say the new king is building castles everywhere. Your neighbor confides in you later, his voice hushed, as you share a cup of ale in the alehouse. Not like anything we've ever seen before. Great wooden towers on mounds of earth, surrounded by walls. They can control the whole countryside from them. You've never seen a castle. The Saxons built fortified towns, known as buzz, formidable in their own way, but the Norman castles are something altogether different. Centers of military power, designed not just for defense, but to dominate and intimidate, symbols of a new, oppressive order. And they're bringing in new laws, too. Another man adds, shaking his head slowly. Written in their language, not ours. They say we'll all have to learn French now if we want to get ahead. The language barrier is already causing profound problems. The Normans speak French, while the common people of England speak English, though a version that would sound quite strange to modern ears, filled with words and sounds that have long since evolved or disappeared. It is yet another wedge driven between conqueror and conquered. As spring reluctantly gives way to summer, tensions in the land continue to mount. News of rebellions in various parts of the country reaches your village, carried on the wind by weary travelers. Some Saxon nobles who had initially submitted to William have now risen against him, their patience exhausted, their sense of injustice overwhelming. The North, always independent-minded and fiercely proud, is proving particularly resistant to this new Norman rule. Yet, in your village, life continues with a cautious, almost desperate normalcy. You work, you eat, you sleep, a repetitive cycle meant to ward off despair. Your children grow, their small lives unfolding oblivious to the political turmoil. You begin to teach your son the beginnings of your ancient craft, showing him how to maintain the forge fire, how to judge the precise color of heated metal, how to strike true with the hammer, a legacy you hope he will one day inherit, though the future feels so uncertain. But beneath this veneer of routine, there is a pervasive undercurrent of unease in everything. When strangers appear on the road, people hurry inside, their faces shuttered. Conversations stop abruptly when certain topics arise. hushed warnings exchanged with a glance. Everyone is waiting, wondering with a silent dread what will happen next. The answer comes, stark and brutal, in the autumn of 1068. William, unwilling to tolerate any challenge to his authority, marches north with his army, a disciplined and fearsome host, intent on quelling the growing resistance. He systematically builds castles at strategically vital locations: Warwick, Nottingham, York, Lincoln, Huntingdon, and Cambridge, creating an impregnable network of Norman power centers, each one a stark reminder of his absolute dominion. The message is chillingly clear. The conquest of England is not negotiable. Resistance is futile. You hear of these grim developments from the few brave travelers and merchants who still pass through, their stories painting a troubling, horrifying picture. Saxon nobles are being summarily deposed, their ancient lands and titles stripped away and given to Norman knights, foreigners who barely speak your tongue. Peasants, your own countrymen, are being forced to labor, often under harsh conditions, on the construction of these very castles, the instruments that will be used to control and subjugate them. It's only a matter of time before they reach us, your wife says one evening, her voice barely a whisper so the children, sleeping soundly, won't hear. Her eyes are filled with a desperate fear. What will we do? You have no easy answer for her, no comforting lie to offer. What can you do? Flight is certainly a possibility. Some Saxons, unable to bear the new yoke, have fled to the relative safety of Scotland, or even as far as Constantinople, where they've joined the legendary Varangian Guard, the elite Byzantine unit famous for recruiting skilled warriors from Northern Europe. But such a journey is far beyond your means, an impossible dream, and would mean abandoning everything you've painstakingly built, every memory, every connection. We endure, you finally say, your voice firm, trying to inject courage into your own heart as much as hers. We adapt. We survive. She nods, though her eyes remain wide and worried, reflecting the unspoken truth. She knows, as you do, that such survival may come at a terrible, unforeseen cost. Winter arrives again, harsher and more unforgiving than the last. Food is desperately scarce. The disruptions of the past year, the wars, the forced marches, the uncertainty, have severely affected the autumn harvests, and the new, exorbitant taxes have left even less for ordinary people. In your village, families share what little they have, a testament to their enduring community spirit, but hollow cheeks and tired, sunken eyes become more common with each passing, bitter cold day. Your forge remains busy, but increasingly, it is weapons, crude knives, sharpened spearheads, axe blades, rather than farm tools that fill your days. The people are preparing, though for what exactly, and against whom, no one quite knows with certainty. Then, in January of 1069, the North, long simmering with discontent, erupts in open, furious rebellion. Edgar the Etheling, the last remaining heir of the old Saxon royal house, a symbol of hope, returns from his exile in Scotland. He quickly joins forces with the powerful northern earls, and the people of York, emboldened and defiant, rise up en masse against their Norman overlords. The garrison that William had left to hold York Castle is massacred, its commander, Robert Fitzrichard, among the dead. Your village is close enough to York to hear rumors of the uprising almost immediately, carried on the wind of desperate hope. There's a surge of exhilaration, a fierce, defiant hope. Perhaps the Norman yoke can be thrown off after all. Some of the younger men, fired by patriotism and a thirst for vengeance, talk excitedly of joining the rebels, eager to fight for Saxon freedom. But you are more cautious, tempered by experience and a deep-seated pragmatism. You've heard enough about William to know he won't accept defeat easily. His response to rebellion, you are certain, will be swift and merciless. And you have your family to think of, their lives paramount. Your caution proves warranted. William marches north again, a whirlwind of vengeful retribution. He rebuilds the destroyed castle at York, a brutal statement of dominance, and punishes with terrifying cruelty all those involved in the uprising. But this, you soon learn, is just the beginning. In the autumn of 1069, a new, formidable threat appears. A large Danish fleet, led by the formidable King Sweyn of Denmark, arrives on England's shores. They quickly join forces with Edgar the Atheling and the northern rebels, creating a powerful, potentially overwhelming alliance against the Normans. Once again, York, the symbolic heart of northern England, falls to the anti-Norman forces. For a brief, intoxicating moment, it truly seems as if the tide might be turning. The Danes are formidable warriors, their history in England long and often successful, and their presence, combined with local knowledge and fierce Saxon support, makes them a truly potent force. Could they actually drive out the Normans, sending William back across the Channel? William's response, however, is characteristically decisive and utterly ruthless. He first pays off the Danes an immense sum of gold to withdraw their fleet and forces, cunningly removing a key, powerful component of the rebel alliance. Then, rather than simply recapturing York and punishing the ringleaders, he decides on a strategy so brutal, so utterly comprehensive, that it will eliminate the possibility of northern resistance once and for all. As December of 1069 approaches, rumors, chilling whispers that turn into panicked shouts, reach your village of massive Norman forces approaching. But this isn't just an army coming to restore order. It is something infinitely, unimaginably worse. They're destroying everything. A breathless messenger, his face streaked with soot and tears, tells the gathered villagers, his voice hoarse with terror. Burning houses, killing livestock, salting the very fields so nothing will grow. They want to make sure no army can be supported here, no rebellion can ever again take root. This is the horrifying beginning of what will become known to history as the Harrying of the North, William's scorched earth campaign, a calculated act of genocide designed to break the spirit of northern England forever. You look at your family, huddled close, their innocent faces etched with fear, at your home, the only sanctuary they've ever known, at the forge where you've worked all your life, a legacy passed down through generations. And in that terrifying moment, you know, with a cold certainty that grips your very soul, that everything, truly everything, is about to change irrevocably. The Norman Conquest, which had once seemed like a distant political upheaval, a problem for kings and nobles, has finally, devastatingly, reached your very doorstep. The night is cold, brutally so, the stars hard and bright, glittering like chips of ice in the vast winter sky. You sit with your family around the hearth fire, its diminishing flames offering scant comfort. All your most valuable possessions, not many, but precious nonetheless, are packed into small, worn bundles, ready to move at a moment's notice. Outside, the village is eerily quiet, but it is the quiet of profound fear, not of peace. "What will happen to us, Papa?" your daughter asks, her small face solemn in the flickering firelight, her innocent eyes wide with a question you cannot fully answer. You wish you had words that could comfort her, a promise you knew you could keep. Instead, you simply draw her closer, wrapping your arm around her small, trembling shoulders. "We'll stay together," you say, the words a desperate vow. That's what matters most. But as the dancing flames cast long, grotesque shadows on the walls of your cherished home, you can't help but wonder, with a chilling dread, if even that modest promise will be possible to keep in the terrifying days to come. The warning comes at dawn, a shrill cry slicing through the crisp morning air. A boy from a neighboring village stumbles into your settlement, breathless, his young face streaked with soot and tears, his eyes wild with terror. "They're coming," he gasps, collapsing onto the packed earth. "The Normans, they've burned everything. Towton is gone. They killed everyone who didn't run fast enough. Towton, it's less than half a day's walk away, a mere whisper down the dirt track." The Norman forces are moving methodically, deliberately, village by village, farm by farm, leaving nothing behind them but smoldering ash and silent, brutal death. You've prepared as best you can. For weeks, you've been secretly hiding some food in a hollow in the nearby forest, teaching your children where to run if the worst, the unthinkable should happen. Now, the worst is upon you. We need to leave, you tell your wife, your voice firm, devoid of emotion, as she is already gathering the small bundles of possessions you've prepared. There is no time for sentiment, no space for hesitation. You take only what you can carry, some meager food, your ever-present knife, a tinderbox, a thick woolen blanket for each person. Your beloved tools, the heavy implements of your trade, are too cumbersome to bring, save for a small, cherished hammer tucked into your belt. You cast one last, lingering look at your forge, its interior now dark and cold, remembering the years of back-breaking work, the skills passed down from your own father, the legacy you had so hoped to leave your son. "Papa, hurry!" Your daughter's voice, edged with panic, pulls you back to the brutal present. Outside, the village is in utter chaos. Some families are fleeing immediately, abandoning everything, carrying crying children and dragging elderly, stumbling relatives. Others, gripped by a desperate, futile hope, are frantically trying to gather more possessions or hitch reluctant oxen into creaking carts. A few stand frozen in shock, seemingly unable to process the horrifying reality unfolding around them. The village reeve is shouting, his voice hoarse, trying to organize some semblance of an orderly evacuation, but fear, primal and overwhelming, has taken absolute hold. You gather your family close, pulling them into a tight, protective huddle, and begin to walk, resolutely, towards the north. The forest there, deep and ancient, might offer some shelter, at least temporarily. You are not alone. Streams of desperate people are leaving other nearby villages too, a ragged, terrified procession. All are heading away from the advancing Norman forces, a flood of humanity fleeing the tide of fire and death. Children cry from hunger and exhaustion, their small voices piercing the cold air. Old people struggle heroically to keep pace, their weathered faces a mask of weary determination. The dirt roads, usually quiet and familiar, are choked with desperate humanity, a river of fear flowing north, away from the inevitable. By midday, you've walked several agonizing miles, your breath coming in ragged gasps, the desperate journey barely begun. Your son, Athelred, a boy barely old enough to be called a man, shifts your youngest, Alara, onto his shoulders. Her small legs, accustomed only to the gentle paths of your village, have given out, and her breath comes in shallow, gasping sobs. Your wife, Edgith, walks beside you, her face a stark mask of endurance, etched with a grim resolve that makes her seem carved from the same hard earth you tread. No one speaks much. What words could possibly capture the desolation that grips your hearts, the terror that coils in your gut? From this low ridge, looking back across the ruined landscape, a chilling tableau unfolds. On the horizon, columns of thick, black smoke claw at the sky, a funereal veil drawn over what was once your home, your world. Each plume marks a village, a farm, a life, consumed by the Normans' relentless fire. Their destruction is not merely an act of war. It is a meticulously executed campaign of annihilation. This, you know, is William's brutal response to the Northern Rebellion, not just to punish those who dared to defy him, but to systematically obliterate any possibility of future resistance. It is a calculated cruelty, designed to break not only bodies, but also the very spirit of a people. You press on, each step a testament to a will refusing to yield, joining the ever-widening river of humanity flowing north. This desperate stream swells with every mile, drawing in more and more refugees. Among them, you recognize faces from neighboring hamlets, a farmer with whom you traded grain, a potter whose wares you admired at market, families with whom you shared festivals. Now, all are equal, stripped of status, united only by the profound and abject desperation that glares from their hollowed eyes. Nightfall descends, bringing with it a fresh wave of challenges. The temperature plummets, a biting cold that seeps into your very bones, gnawing at your spirit. Without proper shelter, the wind becomes an enemy, stealing what little warmth your tattered clothing can offer. Eventually, you stumble upon a small clearing where a few other families have already sought refuge. Huddled together, you manage to build a handful of small fires, sharing the meager bundles of scavenged wood. The flames, fragile beacons in the overwhelming darkness, offer only a paltry warmth, yet their glow renders you visible to any passing Norman patrol. It is a risk you must take, a desperate gamble against the numbing chill of the northern night. Your wife, with tireless effort, manages to transform a small portion of the precious grain you carried into a thin, watery porridge. It is barely enough to quiet the gnawing hunger in your children's bellies, yet you must ration it meticulously. The question of how long looms, a chilling whisper in your mind. How long must you survive on these meager provisions? Sleep, when it finally comes, is fitful and shallow, punctuated by distant, echoing screams that pierce the silence, and the ominous orange glow of new fires staining the horizon. The Normans, it seems, continue their dreadful work through the long, dark hours. The next day dawns, another cycle of relentless walking, another influx of refugees joining your desperate caravan. Whispers and stories, each more horrifying than the last, spread through the ragged ranks. The Normans, it is said, aren't merely burning buildings to the ground. They are slaughtering livestock, spoiling stored food, and even salting the very field so that nothing, not even a weed, will ever grow again. This is no mere act of war. It is the systematic, methodical destruction of an entire region's ability to sustain life, a deliberate act of famine. Why are they doing this, Papa? Your son, Athelred, asks, his young face troubled by a burden far beyond his years. He looks at you, his eyes wide, seeking an explanation for such profound evil. What can you possibly tell him? How do you explain such calculated barbarity to a child? That this is how power asserts itself, how it crushes defiance. That the conquered must be broken, utterly and irrevocably, to ensure they never rise again? These are harsh, soul-crushing lessons for a young mind. They want us to submit, you finally manage to say, the words tasting bitter on your tongue. To accept their rule without question. Will we? He asks, his voice barely a whisper, filled with an innocent yet piercing demand for truth. You have no answer. The question hangs in the cold air between you, heavy with unspoken dread. Days blur into an indistinguishable succession of aching steps and gnawing hunger as your group continues its slow, agonizing pilgrimage north. Your meager food supplies dwindle at an alarming rate, each portion carefully counted, each morsel a treasure. The skeletal forests offer some desperate forage, a few shriveled berries, a handful of nuts, bitter roots dug from the frozen earth. But it is late autumn, sliding irrevocably into winter, and nature's bounty is cruelly sparse. You teach your children which plants are safe to eat, a vital knowledge passed down through generations, now suddenly crucial for their very survival. Other refugees aren't so fortunate. With increasing frequency, you pass bodies by the roadside. The elderly who couldn't keep pace, their strength giving out. The sick who succumbed to exposure, their fevered breath stolen by the cold. The weak who simply gave up, their spirits broken. Your wife, Edgith, instinctively shields the children's eyes from these grim sights. But there is no protecting them from the brutal reality of your situation, from the ever-present specter of death that stalks your every step. After a week of relentless walking, you reach a makeshift camp, a sprawling, desperate gathering of hundreds of displaced Saxons. It lies nestled within a secluded valley, protected by steep, rocky hills, somewhat hidden from the main roads that the Normans traverse. Here, amidst the chaos, people are desperately attempting to organize, to create some semblance of community, a fragile bulwark against the overwhelming despair. A man introduces himself as Leoprick, a former thing, a respected local leader, but now, like you, a refugee. He has, by sheer force of will, taken charge, his presence a steadying hand in the storm. He's established a system for sharing the pitifully small amount of food available and organized patrols to warn of approaching Norman soldiers. We can't stay here long, He tells the gathered refugees, his voice firm but weary. The Normans are moving north. They'll find us eventually. But we can rest here, gather our strength, and plan our next move. For a few precious days, a fragile sense of safety settles over the camp. Your children, Alara and Athelred, find others their age and, for fleeting moments, forget the trauma they've endured, their laughter a small, defiant ripple in the sorrowful air. Your wife joins the women who are weaving rough shelters from branches and whatever scraps of cloth can be spared. You help hunt for food. Though game is scarce, too many hungry people have already scoured these woods. On the third night in the camp, a patrol returns, their faces etched with grim news. Norman soldiers are approaching, less than half a day's ride away. The scout reports, his voice hoarse with urgency. They're following the refugee trails, hunting down anyone who fled. Panic, raw and visceral, ripples through the camp. Some immediately advocate for fleeing into the night, their eyes wild with terror. Others, fueled by a desperate anger, argue for sending what few fighters they have to ambush the Normans. Still others simply weep, too exhausted, too broken to face the prospect of more running. Leoprick, his jaw set, makes the decision. We split up, he commands, his voice cutting through the rising hysteria. Small groups have a better chance of avoiding detection. Head east toward the coast, or north toward Scotland. The Normans can't burn the entire country. By morning, the camp is dissolving, a chaotic exodus of desperate souls. People gather their meager belongings, sharing tearful goodbyes, forming smaller groups of 20 or 30, heading in different directions. You join a band heading northeast toward the coast, a desperate hope clinging to the idea that perhaps there will be fishing villages there, places to find food and, perhaps, even work. The journey north becomes increasingly desperate with each passing day. Winter is settling in with a vengeance, and snowflakes, sharp as shards of ice, begin to swirl in the bitter wind. Your family's shoes are falling apart, mere tatters, their feet wrapped in makeshift rags that offer little protection against the freezing ground. The children's faces grow gaunt, their eyes too large, haunted in their hollowed sockets. Your wife doesn't complain, not once, but you see, with a pang that twists your gut, how she surreptitiously gives portions of her already meager food to the children when she thinks you aren't looking. Disease, a silent, insidious killer, spreads among the refugees. A persistent cough begins in one person, then quickly takes root and spreads through your group, a cruel harvest. Without proper shelter or nutrition, weakened bodies simply cannot fight off illness. Each morning, with a heavy heart, you count fewer faces among you, fewer souls able to continue the agonizing journey. One night, huddled beneath a makeshift shelter of intertwined branches, your youngest daughter, Alara, develops a fever. Her small body burns with a terrifying heat, yet she shivers uncontrollably, convulsing in your wife's arms. Edgith holds her through the long, dark hours, singing softly, a lullaby of sorrow and despair, applying cold cloths to her burning forehead. You and Athelred take turns, desperate and frantic, searching the winter forest for any herbs that might offer solace, but the frozen landscape yields little. By morning, her fever has mercifully broken, but she is weak, barely conscious, her breath shallow and fragile. Knowing she cannot walk, you fashion a rough sled from branches, pulling her along, each tug a prayer. We need to find proper shelter, proper food, your wife says, her voice steady, remarkably so, despite the stark terror that dances in her eyes. She won't survive like this. You've been diligently avoiding villages and towns, fearing Norman patrols, prioritizing concealment over comfort. But now, survival demands a terrible risk. The nearest settlement, according to one of your fellow refugees, is a small coastal fishing village, about a day's journey away. It's so small, the man suggests, that the Normans might have overlooked it, though his tone makes chillingly clear how unlikely that truly is. You have no choice. You set out for the village, pulling your precious daughter on the crudely fashioned sled, while your wife and son tirelessly scour the frigid landscape for any edible plants they can find along the way. The village comes into view late the next day, a miracle on the desolate horizon. From a distance, it appears miraculously intact. No burned buildings, no scarred, destroyed fields are visible. Smoke curls lazily from several chimneys, a vivid, comforting sign of habitation. A fragile flicker of hope, so long extinguished, sparks to life within you. With profound caution, your group approaches. A watchman spots you from his perch and calls out an alarm, but the words he shouts are in English, not the harsh, guttural Norman French. A good sign, a whisper of relief. Men, armed with spears and bows, appear, regarding your ragged, weary band with deep suspicion. We seek shelter. You call out, your voice hoarse. We are refugees from the south. The Normans destroyed our homes. The village headman, a man with a weathered face and cautious eyes, steps forward, studying your group intently. How do we know you're not scouts for Norman forces? He challenges, his gaze piercing. You gesture, helplessly, to your starving children, to your desperate companions, their emaciated forms and haunted eyes speaking volumes. Look at us, you plead, your voice cracking. We've been walking for weeks. My daughter is sick. We need help. After a tense, agonizing moment, the headman nods slowly. We'll give you shelter for the night, he concedes, his voice softening marginally. But be warned, we have little to spare. The Normans haven't reached us yet, but we've taken in refugees before. Our stores are strained. The village is indeed small, perhaps only 20 households clustered tightly near the churning sea. They have been incredibly fortunate so far, remote enough to have escaped William's brutal attention. The villagers are cautious, wary, but not unkind. They share their limited food and provide a barn, a blessed haven where your group can sleep, finally sheltered from the relentless wind. An old woman, her hands gnarled and wise, skilled in healing lore, gently examines your daughter. She prepares a special tea from dried herbs and honey, coaxing the child to drink it slowly, sip by agonizing sip. Rest and food, she prescribes, her voice soft but firm. That's the only medicine that will truly help. For 3 precious days, you remain in the village, a brief, fragile reprieve. Your daughter's strength slowly begins to return, though she remains terribly weak, a shadow of her former self. The villagers, while generous to a fault, are clearly anxious about the mounting strain on their already dwindling resources. Discussions begin, hushed and urgent, about what comes next. You can't stay, the headman tells your group bluntly, his words a cold splash of reality. We barely have enough to get through winter ourselves. Where can we go? Someone asks, the question echoing the despair in every heart. The Normans have destroyed everything to the south. North to Scotland, suggests one man, a glimmer of desperate hope in his eyes. King Malcolm has been taking in English refugees. Or we could try to reach a port, find passage to Denmark or Norway, says another, his voice laced with the longing for escape. You listen to the discussions, weighing options, each one fraught with peril, none of them truly good. Your family has survived the immediate danger, pulled back from the brink of death, but long-term survival remains terrifyingly uncertain. On the 4th day, a fishing boat returns to the village, its crew's faces etched with ominous news. Norman ships have been spotted along the coast. The fisherman warns, his voice raw with fear. They're methodically checking each settlement, continuing their campaign of destruction. They'll be here within days. The village erupts in frantic, desperate activity. Some immediately begin packing to flee, their movements urgent and wild. Others argue for hiding in the nearby caves, hoping to lie low until the danger passes. And some, in their terror, suggest trying to negotiate with the Normans. Negotiate? Scoffs a refugee who arrived before your group, his face hardened by weeks of suffering. You don't understand. They're not looking for submission. They're erasing us. The land matters to them, not the people on it. You gather your family, clinging to the few meager possessions you've managed to keep. Your daughter, though still weak, can now walk short distances, a small mercy. The decision feels impossible, a choice between two terrible ends: stay and risk Norman brutality, or flee once more into the unforgiving winter landscape with few supplies and no clear destination. In the end, you choose to move on. A group of about 40 people, a mix of local villagers and fellow refugees, decide to head north toward Scotland. The journey will be unspeakably hard, especially in the deepening winter, but at least there is the distant, fragile promise of sanctuary at the end. Before you leave, the old village healer approaches your wife. She presses a small pouch of dried herbs into Edgitha's hand. For strength, she says, her gaze resting on your daughter. And this, she then presses a small, carved wooden amulet into your own hand. For protection, she whispers. The amulet is intricately carved with a knot pattern, an ancient Saxon design meant to ward off evil. You're not sure if you believe in such things, but you accept it gratefully, feeling a tremor of connection to the old ways, and gently hang it around your daughter's neck. Your group departs at dawn, a silent, determined procession moving along coastal paths when possible, seeking to avoid the worst of the inland snow. The going is agonizingly slow, with children and elderly members struggling to keep pace, but now there's a grim, unyielding determination. Scotland or death, there is no middle ground. 2 days into this new, desperate journey, your lookouts spot a Norman patrol. Mounted knights, their armor glinting like frozen malice, accompanied by a column of grim foot soldiers, move along the main road that parallels your route. Everyone freezes, ducking instantly behind whatever meager cover is available. A cluster of frost-hardened bushes, a low rise in the terrain. The Normans are less than a quarter-mile away, close enough that you can hear the faint jingle of their equipment, the muffled snorts of their horses, and snippets of their brutal, foreign conversation in French. A chilling realization dawns. They appear to be heading toward the very fishing village you just left. A terrible, crushing weight settles in your chest. Those who chose to stay behind, what will happen to them? You think of the old healer whose gentle hands comforted your daughter. The fisherman who, with such urgency, warned of the approaching threat. The village children whose innocent laughter mingled briefly with your own during your brief, precious respite. But there is nothing you can do. Your own family's survival, stark and brutal, must be your absolute priority now. The Norman patrol passes without spotting your group, their heavy boots crunching on the frozen ground, their French chatter fading into the distance. Once they are well out of sight, you continue north, now moving with even greater, more suffocating caution. That night, from your hilltop campsite, you see the unmistakable orange glow of distant fires to the south. The fishing village, most likely. Another community erased, swallowed by the inferno, its people scattered or worse. Weeks pass in this fashion, a monotonous, brutal cycle of walking, shivering, and searching. Your group moves steadily northward, a phantom caravan, meticulously avoiding roads and settlements whenever possible, always watching for Norman patrols. Sometimes, the gnawing hunger becomes too much, and you must risk entering a village to trade what little you still possess for food: a precious knife, a small piece of jewelry painstakingly saved from your flight, or your labor for a single day's work. The reception varies wildly. Some villages, touched by compassion or a shared enmity for the Normans, welcome you, sharing what little they can spare. Others, consumed by fear, drive you away, terrified that helping refugees will only bring Norman attention down upon them. You cannot blame them. Fear, makes people cruel. Winter deepens its cruel grip. The snow lies thick on the ground, a pristine white blanket that hides treacherous ice and makes every step an exhausting struggle. Food, already scarce, becomes almost impossible to find. Your group hunts when possible, but game is limited, and you're competing with wolves and other predators, made bold by their own desperate hunger. Despite your best efforts, people begin to die. An elderly man simply doesn't wake one morning, frozen solid in his sleep, his last breath a whisper of ice. A young mother, who has been quietly giving her dwindling portions of food to her children, collapses from starvation, her life force utterly depleted. A teenage boy steps through thin ice while crossing a frozen stream and develops a fever that takes him within days. Each death diminishes your group, not just in numbers, but in spirit, leaving a hollow ache. You hold your family closer, a silent, growing fear gripping your heart as your children's ribs become more visibly prominent beneath their pallid skin, as your wife's face grows more hollow, her eyes receding further into their sockets. Then, one bitterly cold morning, your scouts return with unexpected, chilling news. A Norman castle lies ahead, a stark, gray sentinel blocking the most direct route north. This is something new, different from the hastily erected wooden Motte and Bailey castles thrown up after the initial conquest. This is a more permanent structure, being built of stone, its foundations sunk deep into the earth. It commands the narrow valley that offers the easiest passage through the hills, a strategic choke point that will allow the Normans to control all movement in the region. "We'll have to go around," Leopric decides, his voice heavy with the gravity of the choice. Through the high passes. It is a desperate, dangerous choice. The mountain paths are treacherous in winter, covered in deep snow and ice, with the constant, terrifying risk of avalanches and exposure to deadly cold that can steal a life in hours. But the alternative, encountering Norman forces head-on at the castle, is certain death. The detour adds days, perhaps even weeks, to your already interminable journey, pushing your endurance to its absolute limits. The wind howls through the mountain passes, a predatory shriek, cutting through your inadequate clothing like sharpened knives. At night, you huddle together for warmth, your family a tight, shivering knot of shared body heat beneath thin, threadbare blankets. One morning, as you emerge from your crude shelter, stiff with cold, you see something remarkable, something that makes your heart leap with a mixture of fear and impossible hope. A rider approaching, but not a Norman. He wears the distinctive, rugged dress of a Scottish border lord, and behind him ride a dozen armed men, their faces stern beneath their hoods. Leopric, ever the leader, moves forward to meet him, his hands raised, palms open, to show he carries no weapons. The conversation is tense at first. Your ragged group, appearing out of the desolate mountains, could easily be bandits or, worse, Norman spies. But gradually, as Leopric explains your plight, the Scottish lord's posture relaxes. A flicker of understanding, then compassion, crosses his weathered face. King Malcolm has offered sanctuary to those fleeing William's butchery, he tells you, his voice deep and resonant. We've heard of the horrors in the south. There are already thousands of English refugees in Scotland. For the first time in months, a genuine, undeniable hope flickers to life within you, a warmth spreading through the numb despair. The Scottish lord, seeing your desperate state, provides your group with food, hard, salted fish, wholesome oat cakes, and a skin of strong spirits that burns going down but warms you from the inside out, chasing away some of the cold that has permeated your very being. He offers invaluable guidance on the safest route to cross the border and warns of areas where Norman influence has already spread, their tendrils reaching ever further north. William's reach grows longer by the day, he cautions, his brow furrowed. Even the Scottish king must be careful not to provoke him too directly. With renewed strength in your weary bodies and a fragile spark of hope in your spirits, your group continues the journey. The Scottish lord's supplies make a critical difference, providing the much-needed energy to navigate the treacherous, difficult terrain. 3 days later, you cross an invisible line. There is no physical marker, no grand archway, but Leopric, who has traveled these wild lands before, announces, his voice thick with emotion, that you have entered Scotland. A ragged cheer goes up from your group, quickly hushed for fear of drawing unwanted attention. You're not safe yet. The border regions are contested territory, a wildland patrolled by both Scottish and Norman forces. But you are closer to sanctuary, closer to the promise of a new beginning, than you have been since fleeing your burning village. The landscape begins to change, growing more rugged and mountainous, untamed and beautiful. Villages here speak a different dialect, a fascinating, challenging mix of English, Norse, and ancient Celtic languages that is difficult to understand. But the people, though cautious, are welcoming, especially when they learn you are fleeing the Normans, a shared enemy creating an unexpected bond. Many of your countrymen have passed this way. An innkeeper tells you when your group stops to barter for food and a brief rest. The king has settled some on royal lands. Others have joined his army. He's happy to have experienced Saxon warriors. This news brings mixed feelings. Sanctuary is available, a blessing beyond measure, but at what cost? Will you become a soldier in a foreign army, fighting for a foreign king? A tenant farmer on a Scottish lord's land, bound to his service? What future can you truly build for your children in this new, strange land? These weighty questions occupy your mind as your group continues toward Edinburgh, where, you are told, representatives of the king are coordinating the settlement of English refugees. The journey remains hard, the cold biting, the hunger a constant companion, but there's a profound difference now. You are moving towards something, a tangible hope, not just away from endless destruction. Your wife, Edgith, with her keen perception, notices this subtle change in you. You're standing straighter, she observes, her voice soft, one evening as you make camp, her eyes searching yours. "We might survive this," you reply, the words a fragile whisper, almost afraid to voice the hope aloud, lest it shatter. She takes your hand, her fingers thin but surprisingly strong, her grip firm. "We already have." You look at your children, Athelred and Alara, gathering firewood nearby. Their bodies are still gaunt, their clothes in tatters, but they are alive. Your daughter has regained some strength, though you know she will always bear the invisible scars of this ordeal. Your son has grown up too quickly, his face hardened, taking on responsibilities no child should ever bear. But they have survived the harrying of the North, William's brutal campaign of systematic destruction that will leave Yorkshire and surrounding counties utterly devastated for generations. The Doomsday Book, which will record England's lands and resources some 20 years in the future, will still list much of Yorkshire as waste, a cold, bureaucratic term for land producing no tax revenue because it has been destroyed or abandoned. You don't know this yet, of course. You only know that your world has been shattered, that you've been driven from the land of your ancestors, forced to seek refuge in a foreign kingdom. As your small fire burns low that night, you look up at the vast, star-filled sky, the same stars that shine over your abandoned village, over the rising Norman castles across England, over William's court in London. The world, you realize, has changed irrevocably, and you with it. "Tell us a story, Papa," your daughter, Alara, requests, leaning against your side, her voice soft with the promise of sleep. "About home." So you begin to speak, your voice a low murmur against the crackle of the fire, describing the village as it was before the Normans came. You paint vivid pictures, the cozy houses with their thick, thatched roofs, the sturdy church where you celebrated festivals and marked the passing seasons, the forge, your own, where you worked metal into tools and weapons. You speak of neighbors and friends, of bustling harvest festivals and joyous winter celebrations, of the comforting, predictable rhythms of a life now lost. Your children listen, their eyes growing heavy with sleep, absorbing every word. This is important, you realize. These memories, these stories, they connect your children to their heritage, to the England that existed before the conquest, before the flames. The Normans may have taken your land, your home, your livelihood, but they cannot take these stories, not unless you let them die. So you commit, there under the alien Scottish stars, to remembering, to passing on what came before. It is a small act of resistance, perhaps, but the most important one available to you now, a defiant flicker against the encroaching darkness. As your children finally drift off to sleep, your wife speaks softly, her voice barely a whisper. "What will we do in Scotland?" You consider the question, a new weight, yet one filled with possibility. "I still have my skills. People always need a blacksmith. She nods, a small, knowing gesture. And I can weave, spin, sew. We'll build something new. Something new, you echo, looking into the vast darkness beyond your small circle of firelight. But we won't forget what was lost. In the distance, a wolf howls, a lonely, ancient sound that perfectly captures the complex mixture of grief and fierce determination you feel. You have survived William's brutal attempt to break the North, but at a terrible, incalculable cost. Now comes the challenge, the arduous task of building a new life from the shattered pieces of the old. You add another branch to the fire, watching the sparks rise toward the star-filled sky, each tiny ember a fleeting hope. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, more struggles, but for now, your family is together, and you are moving towards safety. In these dark, brutal times, perhaps that's as much as anyone can hope for. As sleep begins to claim you, you hold tight to that thought, a small flame of hope in the long, cold night of the Norman Conquest. Edinburgh rises before you like something from another world. Having spent your entire life in a small northern village, you've never seen anything remotely like this hilltop fortress. Stone buildings, sturdy and imposing, cluster around a massive castle that dominates the surrounding landscape, its formidable walls a testament to power and permanence. Smoke rises from hundreds of chimneys, weaving into the clear spring air, and the distant sounds of a bustling city reach you even at this distance. Traders calling their wares, animals braying, the rhythmic clang of hammers striking metal. It's so big, your son, Athelred, whispers, his voice filled with awe, his eyes wide with wonder. Your journey has taken nearly 2 months, a lifetime of hardship. Winter is finally giving way to early spring, the first brave green shoots appearing in the Scottish countryside, a hopeful contrast to the desolation you left behind. Your group has dwindled further. Some chose to settle in smaller towns along the way, unable to face more travel, while others simply succumbed to the hardships, their strength finally giving out. Only about 20 of you remain, bound together by shared suffering and the indelible memory of homes destroyed. As you approach the city gates, stern guards, clad in their king's colors, eye your ragged band with suspicion, their hands resting on their weapons. Leopric, ever the diplomat, steps forward, explaining your situation in careful, measured terms. The guards' expressions soften slightly, a flicker of tired understanding in their eyes. More English refugees, one says to another, a note of weary familiarity in his tone. King Malcolm's orders are to direct them to the steward's office. You're allowed to enter, though the guards issue a firm warning to cause no trouble. The city streets are a bewildering labyrinth, narrow and crowded, the tall buildings pressing close on either side, casting long shadows. People stare openly at your group, your torn clothes and gaunt faces marking you clearly as displaced persons, refugees. The steward's office is located in a sturdy stone building near the castle, bustling with activity. Here, a harried official, his face lined with the weight of countless administrative tasks, listens to Leopric's concise account of your grueling journey, making occasional notes on a piece of parchment. Yes, another sad tale, he says, not unkindly, but with the profound weariness of someone who has heard similar stories many times before. You're not the first to flee William's cruelty, nor will you be the last, I fear. He examines his records, running a finger down a column of names. We have some land available, about 20 miles west of here. Good farming soil, though it needs clearing. Several English families have already settled there. Leopric turns to your group, his gaze sweeping over each anxious face. What say you? Shall we take this offer? There's a brief, hushed discussion. Some of your companions are visibly disappointed. They had hoped to stay in the city, where their crafts might find ready markets, where the bustle offered a sense of lost civilization. Others are pleased at the prospect of land, something many never truly owned in England, bound as they were to a lord. I'm a blacksmith, you tell the steward, stepping forward. I need a place to practice my craft. The man considers this, tapping a finger on his parchment. The settlement needs tradesmen. You could set up a forge there. Or, he adds, seeing your hesitation, there's a smithy in Leith, down by the harbor, seeking apprentices and assistants. The master there is English himself, fled after Hastings. A choice then. Join the new Saxon settlement in the quiet countryside, or remain near the city, working for another blacksmith. You look at your family, Edgith, Athelred, and little Alara, considering what would truly be best for them, for their future. Your wife speaks up, her voice clear and decisive. The city is crowded, the air thick with smoke. Our children need space, clean air, and we've always lived in a village. Her words resonate deeply, settling the turbulent debate within you. We'll go to the settlement, you tell the steward, your voice firm. He nods, making a final note. You'll leave tomorrow. There's a wayhouse for refugees where you can spend the night. Food is provided. That night, your family sleeps indoors for the first time in months. The wayhouse is simple, a large, drafty hall with pallets arranged on the floor, but after so long, sleeping rough under the open sky, exposed to the biting wind and numbing cold, it feels unbelievably luxurious, a sanctuary. The unfamiliar warmth, the solid roof overhead, the promise of safety, it is a comfort you hadn't dared to dream of, a small, profound blessing at the end of an impossible journey. Many others shared the rough-hewn hall with you that first night, their hushed voices weaving a tapestry of shared suffering. Most were English refugees, like your family, but scattered among them were the harsher accents of Welshmen and even the guttural tones of a few Danes, their fates intertwined by the same brutal hand. Stories were exchanged in low murmurs around the flickering firelight, tales of Norman cruelty so vile they made the stoutest heart recoil. Villages put to the torch, harvests plundered, families separated by the sword, and the desperate, harrowing escapes through fun and forest. Each narrative held different details, painted unique horrors, but the essence was identical. William's conquest had torn apart the fabric of English life, scattering its people across Europe like chaff in a storm, a bitter diaspora born of violence and dispossession. The first rays of dawn brought the promise of another step forward, or perhaps just further into the unknown. A creaking cart arrived, its sturdy wooden wheels a welcome sight, to transport the elderly and the youngest children from your group, along with the few precious possessions you had managed to salvage, a worn blanket, a carving knife, a child's wooden toy. The rest of you, stronger of limb and spirit, walked alongside, forming a weary procession. The Scottish steward, a man whose quiet efficiency spoke volumes, provided a roughly sketched map and basic provisions, enough dried meat and hardtack to last several days, a small sack of assorted seeds for planting, and a few simple, well-worn tools. The journey was a test of endurance, stretching over 2 grueling days. But as promised, the land that greeted you was rich and fertile, though wild and untamed, with dense patches of forest that would demand sweat and toil before any planting could even begin. You arrived at what was less a village and more a burgeoning outpost of resilience. Approximately 30 families had already begun to establish themselves, their simple wooden houses forming a rough, protective circle against the wilderness. Beyond them, fields were being painstakingly cleared, the stumps of felled trees testament to their labor. At the heart of this nascent community, a small, unadorned wooden church rose, a beacon of faith and continuity. These Saxon refugees, having endured their own impossible journeys, were already rebuilding the very structures of the lives they had lost. You were met not with effusive cheer, but a cautious, knowing welcome, a silent understanding passed between those who had shared the same crucible of suffering. An older man, Godric, whose weathered face and calm demeanor seemed to have naturally designated him as the settlement's leader, stepped forward. He gestured towards an open patch of land where you could begin to build your own house. "There's no smith here yet," he remarked, a weariness in his voice that suddenly vanished, his eyes lighting up with unexpected hope when you told him your trade. "We've been traveling all the way to Leith for any metal work. Having you here will be a true blessing. Over the next few weeks, The raw ache of displacement slowly began to yield to the rhythm of purposeful labor. The community rallied around each new arrival, a testament to their shared plight and collective spirit. Axes rang against timber, hammers struck nails, and the air filled with the scent of fresh-cut wood and damp earth. With the help of your new neighbors, your own house slowly took shape. It was a simple structure, a single room with a central hearth, its walls of wattle and daub, its roof carefully thatched against the elements. Yet, it was undeniably yours, a tangible anchor in this new world, a place no Norman knight could wrest away. Near the edge of the fledgling settlement, you constructed your forge. It was primitive, a far cry from the sturdy stone workshop you had left behind in England. But the familiar heat of the coals and the ring of hammer on anvil brought a measure of solace. Though many of your cherished tools had been lost in the desperate flight north, you fashioned new ones from what crude materials were available, adapting with the ingenuity born of necessity. Your wife, with her characteristic quiet determination, began to cultivate a small garden, planting the precious seeds provided by the steward alongside others she had meticulously gathered from the surrounding countryside. Slowly, gradually, the haunted, wary look that had clung to your children's faces during your flight began to fade, replaced by the innocent joy of play as they ran with others their age, their laughter echoing through the trees as they learned the rhythms of this new, hard-won existence. Life settled into a demanding but purposeful pattern. The land, fertile though it was, demanded constant attention, each field carved from the wild Scottish earth. Building a community from nothing required every hand, every ounce of strength and will, but in that shared endeavor lay a profound sense of purpose and a growing, precious sense of security. King Malcolm's protection was a tangible shield, meaning you no longer scanned the horizon for the dreaded sight of Norman soldiers, their banners snapping in the wind. As summer's embrace deepened, your forge became a hive of activity. The settlement had a pressing need for all manner of metal items. Hinges for newly hung doors, countless nails for construction, robust plowshares for breaking new ground, and a steady stream of knives for daily use. Your skills, honed by generations of craftsmen, were in high demand, and your status within the growing community rose accordingly, a quiet but firm recognition of your essential contribution. One evening, as the lingering twilight painted the western sky in hues of deep violet and gold, your family sat outside your simple home, enjoying the cool, fresh air. A stranger approached the settlement's rough perimeter. His bearing was unmistakable. English, yes, but better dressed than most refugees, with the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. "I seek the blacksmith," he announced, his voice carrying clearly to those nearest him. You stood, a flicker of apprehension mixed with curiosity stirring within you. "I am the smith here," you replied. The man approached, his gaze sharp and assessing, studying you with an intensity that made you hold your breath. "I am Edgar. Some call me Etheling." A low murmur rippled through the onlookers, the name passing from lip to lip in hushed whispers. Etheling. This was the last prince of the Saxon royal line. The man who might have been king had Harold Godwin's son not taken the throne, a figure legendary for leading multiple, desperate rebellions against William the Conqueror. A tremor of awe, mixed with a profound sense of the weight of history, passed through you. "What brings you to our humble settlement, Lord?" you asked, uncertain how to properly address such a figure. He lowered his voice, drawing you closer into his confidence. "I travel between the English communities in Scotland, keeping connections alive, and gathering support for the day when we might return." The words struck you with the force of a blacksmith's hammer. Return to England? The very thought, once a dangerous, half-forgotten dream, now burned with renewed intensity. Edgar nodded, his eyes alight with a fierce, unyielding conviction. "William's hold is not as secure as he believes. There are still those who would rise against him, given the chance. The Danes might yet support another invasion." The prospect stirred something deep within you, a flicker of long-dormant hope that your exile might not, after all, be permanent. That someday, perhaps, you might see your homeland again. But the vivid, brutal memory of the harrying, the scorched earth, the starving faces, the endless grief, tempered this hope with a cold, sharp caution. The price of failure, you knew, would be unimaginably high. Higher, you observed, your voice quiet, than what our people have already paid? Edgar countered, his arms sweeping to encompass the entire settlement. This collection of displaced persons painstakingly building new lives from nothing. This, he said, is the answer to your question. You had no retort. The truth of his words hung heavy in the air. Edgar stayed for several days, a charismatic and unsettling presence. He spoke with various community members, sharing fragmented news from other English settlements across Scotland and, more chillingly, from England itself. His presence brought forth a potent mixture of hope and unease. Some, particularly the younger men, were visibly inspired by his unwavering vision of return and the restoration of the old English ways, their eyes gleaming with a rekindled fire of rebellion. They spoke openly of joining any future fighting force. Others, especially those with young families and the scars of memory still fresh, expressed deep skepticism, fearing the prospect of more violence, more displacement, and the crushing cost of risking the precious, fragile security they had so painfully built. You found yourself acutely torn. England was your homeland, the soil where generations of your ancestors had lived, worked, and died. The thought of never seeing it again, of it being lost forever, caused a deep, persistent ache in your heart. But you had also witnessed firsthand the utter devastation wrought by William's forces, the merciless efficiency of their brutality. Was it truly worth risking everything again? Your family's safety, this hard-won peace, the very lives of those you cherished, for a dream that might only lead to further destruction? Your wife, ever attuned to the silent currents of your soul, sensed your turmoil. What troubles you? She asked one night, her voice soft, as you sat by the hearth, watching the mesmerizing dance of the flames. Edgar's talk of return, you admitted, the words heavy with unspoken longing. Part of me wants to believe it's possible. She was quiet for a long moment, gazing into the fire's depths. I miss home too, she finally said, her voice laced with a familiar sorrow. But home is also where our family is safe right now. That's here. Her wisdom, as it always did, centered you, gently pulling you back from the treacherous currents of yearning and idealism to the firm ground of present reality. For now, at least, your absolute priority had to be establishing and safeguarding the security of your family in this new place. The dream of return, no matter how potent, would have to wait. Summer unfolded its long, warm days, and the settlement continued its slow, deliberate expansion. More refugees arrived, each bearing their own tale of harrowing escape from the tightening grip of Norman control, their weary eyes reflecting the same trauma. A watermill, a marvel of ingenuity and communal effort, was constructed on the nearby stream, its rhythmic turning becoming a comforting sound. Fields of barley and wheat, planted with desperate hope, began to ripen under the benevolent sun. Livestock, primarily hardy sheep and a few sturdy cattle, grazed peacefully on the hillsides, symbols of growing prosperity. Your forge thrived, the clang of your hammer a constant, reassuring presence. You had taken on your eldest son as an apprentice, teaching him the ancient skills passed down through your family line, guiding his hands as they learned the intricate dance of fire and metal. He showed a natural talent, his hands already developing the strength and precision the demanding work required. Watching him at the anvil, his brow furrowed in concentration, filled you with a quiet, profound pride. Your daughter, bright and quick-witted, helped your wife with the garden, which now produced a bounty of vegetables and herbs, a vibrant testament to their combined efforts. She was also learning to weave from one of the older women in the settlement, a valuable skill that would serve her well in this new world. One day, the mundane rhythm of settlement life was broken by the arrival of a merchant from Edinburgh, his packed train laden with exotic goods to trade, and, more importantly, news from the wider world. Around the communal evening fire, his tales held everyone captive. William's reach grows longer, he reported, his face grim in the firelight. He's extended his control north to the Teesside and west into Wales. Castles are rising everywhere. Stone sentinels watching over conquered lands. And the people, the English? Someone asked, the question a collective, anxious breath. The merchant's expression darkened further. Those who survive the harrying face a hard road. New lords demand higher taxes than the old. English laws are being replaced by Norman ones. Justice comes with a French accent. He then recounted specific, chilling accounts. Saxon nobles dispossessed, their ancestral lands granted to grasping Norman knights. English bishops replaced by Norman clergy, their piety secondary to their loyalty. Entire villages forced to labor on the construction of the conqueror's massive castles. Ancient forests declared royal hunting grounds, with harsh, summary penalties for any commoner found hunting there, even for sustenance. It's as if they want to erase everything English, the merchant concluded, his voice heavy with despair. Language, law, custom, all replaced by Norman ways. The news settled heavily upon the community, a blanket of cold despair. Many had still harbored faint hopes of an eventual return, of a world that might somehow right itself. Now, those hopes seemed impossibly distant, perhaps irrevocably lost. Later, unable to sleep, you slipped outside your house. The night was clear, the stars scattered across the vast northern sky like silver dust. The settlement was quiet, save for the occasional cry of a baby or the distant bark of a dog. Your mind raced, caught in a whirlwind of questions. You thought about those who had remained behind, or who had fled to other, unknown places. What had become of them? Were they adapting to Norman rule, learning French, accepting their brutal new reality? Or were they resisting, however subtly, preserving their English identity despite everything? Your thoughts drifted back to the forge you had left behind, the village now likely burned to ashes, its memory purged from the land. You wondered if anything remained of your former life, or if it had been completely erased, as if you had never existed there at all. A soft sound interrupted your reverie. Your wife had followed you outside, a rough woolen blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. Remembering? She asked, her voice a gentle murmur, knowing you too well. You nodded, the question of what was left hanging unspoken between you. She slipped her hand into yours, her touch warm and reassuring. We're left our children, our knowledge, our stories. William can burn villages, but he can't burn what's in here. She tapped her head gently, then placed her hand over her heart. Or here. Her words were a profound reminder, cutting through the despair with the sharp clarity of truth. The conquest wasn't just about land and power, about castles and crowns. It was also about memory, identity, the very continuation of a people and their ways of life. This realization clarified something fundamental for you. Whether or not you ever returned to England, your task now, your sacred duty, was to preserve what you could of Saxon culture, to ensure your children knew the stories, the crafting techniques, the seasonal celebrations, the very essence that defined your people. The very next day, you began to act on this newfound understanding. In the evenings, after the arduous work of the day was done, you gathered not just your own children, but others from the settlement as well. You told stories of England before the Normans came, vivid tales of Saxon kings and heroes, of ancient festivals and cherished customs, of the land as it was. Others joined in, adding their own precious memories. A former monk, his eyes alight with remembrance, recited poetry in the Old English style, his voice rising and falling in its distinctive, rhythmic pattern, a melody from a lost age. An older woman, her hands gnarled with work, taught traditional songs to the children, their young voices tentatively joining hers. A carpenter demonstrated techniques passed down through generations of Saxon craftsmen, showing how to join wood with elegant simplicity. These impromptu gatherings swiftly became a regular occurrence, a vital way of maintaining connection to what had been lost, a collective act of remembrance. They also strengthened the community, binding together people from different parts of England through the powerful, shared thread of cultural memory. Autumn arrived, painting the Scottish hillsides in fiery hues, bringing with it the long-awaited harvest. The settlement's first crops were gathered in, stored carefully in newly built cellars and barns for the unforgiving winter ahead. There was a tentative celebration, not as elaborate or boisterous as the harvest festivals of pre-conquest England, but a deeply meaningful acknowledgement of this vital milestone, a small victory hard-won against the odds. During the modest festivities, news arrived from Edinburgh, carried by a swift rider. King Malcolm, it was announced, had married Margaret, the very sister of Edgar the Etheling, formally aligning himself with the exiled English royal line. The marriage was a powerful symbol, a political masterstroke that reinforced Malcolm's unwavering support for the English refugees, giving you and your community greater confidence in your settlement's future. Winter followed, a season far harsher and more relentless than any you had known in England. Snow blanketed the settlement for weeks at a time, transforming the landscape into a stark, beautiful monochrome. The houses, hastily built during the spring and summer's urgency, proved woefully inadequate against the biting cold. Drafts whistled through gaps in the wattle and daub walls, and frost formed icy patterns on the inside of the thatched roofs, a constant, chilling reminder of nature's power. Your forge, with its roaring fire, became an unintended gathering place, its warmth a magnet for those seeking respite from the bone-deep chill. You worked tirelessly throughout the winter, crafting better tools for the spring planting, repairing items damaged by the harsh conditions, and fashioning simple iron fittings to help strengthen the houses against future winters. As the season progressed, food became scarce. The harvest, while a success, had been limited by the late start to planting. Everyone's portions grew smaller, a gnawing reminder of your precarious existence. Your thoughts often turned to those still in northern England, where many others now shared the cramped space with you, a tide of humanity driven north by the same unforgiving storm. Mostly English refugees, their faces etched with similar stories of flight, but also some stoic Welsh, their language a melodic mystery, and even a few Danes, descendants perhaps of earlier conquerors, now themselves displaced. The air buzzed with a low hum of hushed voices, a quiet symphony of sorrow and survival. Stories were exchanged in fragments, tales of Norman brutality, of fields scorched and villages razed, of harrowing escapes under the cloak of night, of loved ones lost to the chaos and never seen again. The specific details, the names of lost hamlets, or the exact manner of escape, might differ, but the chilling essence remained constant. William's conquest had shattered lives, scattering English people across the known world, a vast and reluctant diaspora born of unimaginable violence. Morning, when it finally broke, brought with it a renewed sense of purpose, if not comfort. A single, creaking cart arrived, a rough conveyance meant to carry the most vulnerable, the elderly, whose joints now screamed in protest with every step, and the small children, too young to fully grasp the enormity of their journey. Along with them went what few precious possessions remained, bundles of cloth and cherished trinkets, symbols of lives left behind. The rest of you, the able-bodied, walked alongside, your worn boots crunching on the gravel path. The Scottish steward, a man of few words but apparent efficiency, provided each family with a rough, hand-drawn map, a cryptic guide to your new future, and a meager collection of basic supplies, enough dried meat and hardtack to sustain you for several days, precious seeds for planting, and a few simple, indispensable tools, each wrapped in oiled cloth. The journey was long, a grueling 2 days of walking, your muscles aching, your minds filled with a mix of dread and cautious hope. When you finally arrived, the land, as promised, was indeed fertile, its rich, dark earth smelling of promise. But it was also wild, untamed, with formidable patches of dense forest that needed to be cleared, trunk by stubborn trunk, before any planting could even begin. You found the beginnings of a settlement, a testament to resilience already carved from the wilderness. About 30 families had preceded you, their combined efforts slowly shaping a nascent village. Simple wooden houses, still rough-hewn but sturdy, stood in a loose, protective circle beyond which fields were gradually being cleared, revealing the rich soil beneath. At the heart of it all, a small, unadorned wooden church rose, its modest steeple a silent beacon of faith and continuity. Here, the Saxon refugees had already begun the arduous task of rebuilding not just homes, but the very structures of their former lives, brick by invisible brick. You were greeted with a cautious but profound welcome, a silent recognition passing between you and these strangers. They understood, with an almost painful clarity, exactly what you had endured, for they had faced the same trials, the same crushing loss, the same desperate flight. An older man named Godric, whose weathered face and steady gaze bespoke a quiet strength, seemed to have taken on the mantle of leadership in this fledgling community. He approached you, his eyes scanning your weary group, and then, with a reassuring gesture, showed you where you could begin to build your own house. There was no smith here yet, he explained, a flicker of something akin to excitement sparking in his eyes as he learned of your trade. We've been traveling all the way to Leith for any metalwork, he confessed, a sigh of relief escaping him. Having you here will be nothing short of a blessing. Over the next few weeks, a new rhythm began to take hold. The community, a tapestry woven from shared hardship, worked together tirelessly, helping each new arrival raise a shelter against the elements. Your own house was simple, a single room with a central hearth, its walls built of wattle and daub, its roof a carefully thatched crown of straw. It was humble, yes, but it was yours. No Norman lord, no conquering army, could ever take it from you. That sense of ownership, of undisputed sanctuary, was a profound comfort. With the willing hands of your new neighbors, you constructed a forge near the edge of the settlement, its simple structure a stark contrast to the robust workshop you'd left behind in England. It was primitive, crude even, but you were a smith, and you knew you could work with it. Many of your treasured tools had been lost in the frantic flight north, abandoned for the sake of speed and survival, but you began to fashion new ones, your hands relearning their craft, adapting to the materials available in this new, wild land. Your wife, with her quiet strength and enduring spirit, began to cultivate a small garden outside your house. She planted the precious seeds provided by the steward, supplementing them with others carefully gathered from the surrounding countryside, a tender act of hope against the harsh reality of exile. Slowly, subtly, the haunted look in your children's eyes, a shadow cast by the terror of your flight, began to recede. They played with other children their age, their laughter, tentative at first, then growing louder, echoing through the nascent village. They were learning the rhythms of this new place, weaving themselves into its fabric, unburdened by the crushing weight of memory that still clung to you. Life, though arduous, settled into a pattern. Every day was a testament to hard work, to the relentless demands of a land that had to be tamed, of a community that had to be built from nothing. Yet, in that endless labor, there was a profound sense of purpose, a shared endeavor that slowly fostered a growing sense of security. King Malcolm's protection, though distant, was a tangible shield, meaning you no longer lived in constant dread of Norman soldiers appearing on the horizon, their banners proclaiming renewed conquest. As summer approached, your forge became a hive of activity. The settlement, growing by the day, had an insatiable need for all manner of metal items. Strong hinges for newly hung doors, countless nails for ongoing construction, sturdy plowshares for breaking new ground, sharp knives for daily use in the fields and hearth. Your skills, honed by generations, were in high demand, and with each hammer blow, your status within the community grew, cementing your place as an indispensable pillar of their new world. One warm evening, as your family sat outside your humble house, enjoying the lingering twilight, a stranger approached the settlement. Even from a distance, he commanded attention. He was clearly English, by his bearing and the cut of his tunic, but far better dressed than most of the refugees, with the unmistakable demeanor of someone accustomed to authority, a man of noble birth. "I seek the blacksmith," he announced, his voice carrying clearly to those nearest. You rose to your feet, a prickle of apprehension and curiosity stirring within you. "I'm the smith here," you replied, your voice steady despite your surprise. The man approached, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, studying you with an unnerving intensity. "I'm Edgar. Some call me Etheling." A ripple, a collective murmur, ran through the onlookers who had gathered. The name, whispered from mouth to mouth, carried the weight of history and shattered dreams. Etheling. This was the last prince of the Saxon royal line. The man who might have been king had Harold Godwin's son not seized the throne. He was a figure of legend, the leader of multiple, desperate rebellions against William the Conqueror, a defiant symbol of what had been lost. You found yourself struggling for words, uncertain how to address such a figure, a ghost from a past that refused to lie buried. "What brings you to our humble settlement, Lord?" you managed to ask, your voice tinged with awe. Edgar's gaze swept across the growing village, a faint, melancholic smile touching his lips. "I travel between the English communities in Scotland," he replied, his voice lowering, imbued with a quiet urgency. "Keeping connections alive, and gathering support for the day when we might return." The word hung in the air, potent and dangerous. Return. It caught your attention, ignited a spark of something you thought long extinguished. "Return to England?" you echoed, barely a whisper. Edgar nodded, his eyes alight with a conviction that was both inspiring and terrifying. "William's hold is not as secure as he believes. There are still those who would rise against him, given the chance. The Danes might yet support another invasion." The prospect stirred something deep within you, a flicker of hope you hadn't dared to nurture since your flight. A fragile belief that your exile might not be permanent, that someday you might indeed see your homeland again. But the brutal memory of the harrying of the north, the scorched earth and skeletal villages, tempered this burgeoning hope with a heavy cloak of caution. The price of failure, you knew, would be unimaginably high. "Higher," you observed, your voice strained, "than what our people have already paid." Edgar turned, gesturing with an open hand to the settlement around them. This collection of displaced persons, building new lives from nothing, a living monument to William's savagery. "And yet," he countered, his gaze challenging, "you still strive." You had no answer for that. Edgar stayed for several days, his presence an electrifying current through the quiet routines of the village. He spoke with various community members, sharing news from other English settlements scattered across Scotland, and, more tantalizingly, from England itself. His very existence brought a potent mix of hope and unease. Some, particularly the young men whose memories of England were perhaps less tainted by suffering, were inspired by his vision of return and restoration, their spirits rekindled by the thought of righteous vengeance. Others, especially those with young families and newly established homes, expressed deep skepticism, fearing the prospect of more violence, more displacement, a fresh cycle of loss that could shatter the fragile security they had so painstakingly built. After he left, the settlement buzzed with discussion, a vibrant, often contentious, debate fueled by his visit. Young men spoke openly of joining any future fighting force, their eyes alight with the fire of patriotism. But those with young children, their priorities firmly rooted in the present, expressed caution, their voices quiet but firm against risking their hard-won security. You found yourself profoundly torn, caught between the siren call of your homeland and the pragmatic demands of your new life. England was your homeland, the sacred earth where generations of your ancestors had lived, worked, and died, where your own roots ran deep. The thought of never seeing it again caused a deep, physical ache in your chest. But you had also witnessed, firsthand, the unbridled devastation wrought by William's forces. You had seen the suffering, the terror, the sheer, senseless brutality. Was it truly worth risking everything again, plunging your family back into that crucible of despair for a dream that might prove unreachable? Your wife, with her uncanny ability to read the turbulent currents of your mind, sensed your turmoil. "What troubles you?" she asked one night, her voice soft, as you sat by the hearth, watching the mesmerizing dance of the flames. Edgar's talk of return, you admitted, the words heavy on your tongue. Part of me wants to believe it's possible. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the glowing embers. I miss home too, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, a shared sorrow. But home is also where our family is safe right now. And that's here. Her wisdom, as always, centered you, anchoring your wandering thoughts in the present. For now, at least, your priority had to be the unwavering establishment of security for your family in this new, demanding place. The dream of return, noble and potent as it was, could wait. Summer unfolded its long, warm days, and with it, the settlement continued to grow. More refugees arrived, a steady trickle of weary souls, each bearing their own harrowing tale of escape from Norman control, their numbers swelling the ranks of your nascent community. A watermill, a marvel of ingenuity and collective effort, was constructed on the nearby stream, its rhythmic turning a new, comforting sound in the valley. Fields of barley and wheat, sown with hope and watered with sweat, began to ripen, their golden hues promising sustenance. Livestock, mostly hardy sheep and some sturdy cattle acquired through shrewd trade with neighboring Scottish clans, grazed peacefully on the hillsides, their bells tinkling a gentle melody. Your forge, a roaring heart in the community, thrived. You had taken on your son as an apprentice, his eager hands slowly developing the calloused strength and precise movements that the work demanded. Watching him at the anvil, the sparks flying, the metal shaping under his hammer, filled you with a quiet, profound pride, the continuation of a legacy. Your daughter, no less industrious, helped your wife cultivate the garden, which now produced vegetables and herbs in abundance, a vibrant patch of green life. She was also learning to weave from one of the older women in the settlement, her nimble fingers mastering a skill that would serve her well in the years to come. One day, the familiar silhouette of a merchant's wagon appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight. He was from Edinburgh, bringing not only goods to trade but also, more importantly, news from the wider world, a lifeline to the distant lands beyond your valley. Around your evening fire, with the aroma of roasting meat and brewing ale filling the air, he shared what he had heard, his voice a low, somber drone. William's reach, he reported, grew longer and more oppressive with each passing month. He had extended his control north to the River Tees, and west into the wild expanse of Wales. Castles, grim stone sentinels, were rising everywhere, their formidable walls a stark declaration of Norman dominance over conquered lands. And the people, the English? Someone ventured, a collective hush falling over the gathering. The merchant's expression darkened, a grim shadow crossing his face. Those who survived the harrying face a hard road indeed. New lords, speaking a foreign tongue, demand higher taxes than the old Saxon thanes. English laws are being systematically replaced by Norman ones, as if centuries of custom meant nothing. Justice, if it comes at all, now comes with a French accent. He continued, his voice heavy with specific accounts of dispossession and humiliation. Saxon nobles dispossessed, their ancestral lands brutally seized and handed over to Norman knights. English bishops replaced by Norman clergy, their ancient sees now foreign outposts. Entire villages forced into virtual servitude, compelled to labor on the endless construction of castles. New forests declared royal hunting grounds, with harsh penalties, often blinding or death, for any commoner found hunting there, even for survival. It's as if they want to erase everything English, the merchant concluded, his voice laced with despair. Language, law, custom, all replaced by Norman ways. The news settled heavily on the community, a leaden weight of despair. Many had still harbored faint, desperate hopes of eventual return, of a restoration of the old order. Now, those hopes seemed increasingly distant, dissolving into the gathering darkness. Later, unable to sleep, you stepped outside your house. The night was clear, a vast, velvet canvas studded with stars scattered like silver dust across the northern sky. The settlement was quiet, save for the occasional cry of a baby or the sharp bark of a dog. Your mind churned, grappling with the merchant's grim tidings. You thought about those who had remained behind, or who had fled to other, unknown places. What had become of them? Were they adapting to Norman rule, learning French, accepting their brutal new reality? Or were they, in whatever small ways they could, resisting, preserving some shred of English identity despite everything? Your mind turned, as it so often did, to the forge you'd left behind, your ancestral home now probably burned to ashes, its timbers blackened, its hearth cold. You wondered if anything at all, remained of your former life, or if it had been completely erased, as if you had never existed there at all. A soft sound interrupted your troubled thoughts. Your wife had followed you outside, a worn blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders against the night chill. "Remembering?" she asked, her voice gentle, knowing you too well. You nodded, a single, heavy sigh escaping you, wondering what's left. She slipped her hand into yours, her touch warm and reassuring. "We're left our children," she said, her voice firm. "Our knowledge, our stories. William can burn villages, but he can't burn what's in here." She gently tapped her head, then placed her hand over her heart. "We're here." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within you, reminding you of something vital and enduring. The conquest wasn't just about land and power, about castles and taxation. It was also about memory, about identity, about the tenacious continuation of a people and their cherished ways of life. The realization clarified something within you, like a mist lifting from a mountain peak. Whether or not you ever returned to England, your true task now was to preserve what you could of Saxon culture, to ensure your children knew the ancient stories, the intricate crafting techniques, the seasonal celebrations that defined your people, the very essence of what it meant to be English. The very next day, you began to act on this understanding. In the evening, after the day's demanding work was done and the last embers cooled in the forge, you gathered not just your own children, but others from the settlement as well. You told stories of England before the Normans came, vivid tales of Saxon kings and heroes, of joyous festivals and time-honored customs, of the land as it was, vibrant and free. Others, prompted by your words, joined in, adding their own cherished memories, their voices weaving a rich tapestry of the past. A former monk, his eyes alight with remembrance, recited poetry in the Old English style, his voice rising and falling in the distinctive, rhythmic pattern that had echoed through halls for centuries. An older woman, her hands gnarled by work, patiently taught traditional songs to the children, their young voices tentatively joining hers. A carpenter demonstrated techniques passed down through generations of Saxon craftsmen, his hands shaping wood with a skill that defied the crude tools. These gatherings, born of a quiet desperation to remember, became a regular occurrence, a powerful way of maintaining a vital connection to what had been lost. They also strengthened the community in an unexpected way, binding together people from different parts of England through the shared, living tapestry of their cultural memory. Autumn arrived, painting the hillsides in hues of gold and crimson, and bringing with it the eagerly anticipated harvest. The settlement's first crops, barley, wheat, and oats, were gathered, each precious sheaf stored carefully for the harsh winter ahead. There was a tentative celebration, a quiet, almost understated feast, not as elaborate or boisterous as the harvest festivals of pre-conquest England, but a deeply meaningful acknowledgement of this crucial milestone, a victory of resilience. During the celebration, news arrived from Edinburgh, carried by a swift messenger. King Malcolm had married Margaret, the sister of Edgar, the Etheling, formally aligning himself with the English royal line. The marriage was more than a union of two people. It was a powerful political statement, reinforcing Malcolm's unwavering support for the English refugees and giving you all greater confidence in your settlement's future, a precious shield against the darkness. Winter followed, a season of brutal beauty, harsher than any you had known in England. Snow blanketed the settlement for weeks at a time, transforming the landscape into a world of white and silence. The houses, hastily built during the urgency of spring and summer, proved inadequate against the relentless cold. Drafts whistled through countless gaps in the walls, and frost, a delicate, glittering lace, formed on the inside of thatched roofs. Your forge, a roaring beacon of warmth, became an inadvertent gathering place, the intense heat of the fire drawing people seeking respite from the numbing chill. You worked tirelessly throughout the winter, forging better tools for the spring planting, repairing countless items damaged by the harsh conditions, fashioning simple iron fittings to help strengthen the houses against future winters. Food, despite the successful harvest, became scarce as the season progressed, limited by the late start to planting. Everyone's portions grew smaller, and a gnawing worry took root in your heart. You thought often of those still in northern England, where William's relentless destruction had left little to harvest at all. How many were starving this winter? How many children, innocent and vulnerable like yours, wouldn't see the spring? Your family survived, though all of you lost weight you could ill afford to lose. Your daughter, always so vibrant, fell ill with a persistent winter cough that lingered for weeks, a constant, chilling reminder of how fragile your new security truly remained. Spring's arrival brought immense, palpable relief, a collective sigh from the entire settlement. As the last of the snow melted and a verdant green returned to the landscape, the settlement burst into activity. Fields were expanded, pushing back the wild edges of the forest. New houses were built, incorporating improvements learned from winter's harsh lessons. More livestock was acquired through shrewd trade with neighboring Scottish communities, their bleats and lowing adding to the symphony of life. Your forge, a hub of productivity, was busier than ever. You had become essential to the settlement's growth, your skills enabling every expansion, every improvement. Your status, a quiet but undeniable authority, had grown accordingly. People now sought your advice on matters far beyond metalwork, recognizing the deep well of wisdom you had gained through your arduous journey. One bright morning, as you worked with your son at the anvil, teaching him the finer points of shaping hot metal, a rider approached the settlement. He wore the distinctive livery of King Malcolm's court, a flash of bright color against the green landscape, and carried a sealed message. The message, read aloud by the settlement's priest, one of the few who could read the Latin script, contained unexpected, indeed astonishing, news. King Malcolm was establishing a formal coalition of English settlements across Scotland, with representatives chosen to advise him on matters affecting the refugee communities. Your settlement, to your profound surprise, was invited to send one person to participate. You have a steady head, Godric explained, his eyes meeting yours, and you understand both what we've lost and what we're building here. The community, with a unanimous voice, chose you as their representative. This new responsibility took you to Edinburgh monthly, a journey that opened your eyes to a wider world. There, you met with representatives from other English communities, some like yours, carved from the wilderness, others integrated into existing Scottish towns and villages. In these meetings, you learned more about the relentless situation in England. William's control, it was reported, continued to strengthen, growing tighter with each passing year. He had ordered a great survey of his kingdom, recording every piece of land, every animal, every resource, down to the last beehive, to ensure proper taxation and absolute control. The Norman system of feudalism was being firmly established, with all land ultimately belonging to the king, then parceled out to lords who swore loyalty to him, extinguishing any lingering hopes of Saxon land ownership. You also heard stories of resistance, defiant whispers of hope. Not all English had accepted Norman dominance quietly. In the treacherous fens of East Anglia, a rebel named Hereward continued to defy William's forces, using the marshy landscape to his advantage, a constant thorn in the conqueror's side. In other places, there were smaller, everyday acts of defiance, refusing to learn French, stubbornly maintaining English customs despite Norman disapproval, preserving Saxon stories and songs in quiet, rebellious acts of memory. These accounts both inspired and troubled you. The courage of those who resisted deserved profound admiration. But you had seen, firsthand, the terrifying brutality of Norman reprisals. Each act of defiance, however noble, risked bringing down more suffering on communities already struggling simply to survive. During one such meeting, a representative from a coastal settlement brought truly dramatic and deeply disturbing news. William had ordered all English monasteries to hand over their treasures, gold, silver, precious stones, sacred religious artifacts, the accumulated wealth of generations dedicated to God, now being systematically claimed by the conquering king. He fears rebellion, explained the messenger, his voice trembling with outrage. He needs gold to pay his soldiers, to build more castles. He takes it wherever he can find it, even from God's own houses. This systematic seizure of religious treasures shocked even those who had become numb to Norman excesses. It represented not just theft, but sacrilege, a profound violation. A king supposedly blessed by the Pope, now plundering the church itself. Is there nothing sacred to him? Someone asked in dismay, their voice choked with disbelief. The question lingered with you, a chilling echo, as you returned to your settlement. William's conquest seemed to know no limits, respecting no tradition, no boundary, no sacred vow. What had begun as a disputed succession had spiraled into the systematic dismantling of English society, its wholesale replacement with something alien, foreign, and oppressive. Yet, life continued, stubbornly, resiliently. Your settlement grew more established with each passing season. New children were born, the first generation of English who would know Scotland, not England, as their true home. Houses were improved, fields expanded, trade relationships established with neighboring communities, weaving your village into the broader Scottish tapestry. Your own family found a measure of quiet prosperity. Your forge, a testament to your skill and dedication, produced not just utilitarian items now, but also intricate decorative pieces, sought after for their beauty and craftsmanship, fetching good prices in Edinburgh's burgeoning markets. Your son had grown into a skilled smith in his own right, working alongside you as a partner rather than an apprentice, his hammer strokes strong and true. Your daughter had married a young man from another English settlement, a union that brought the two communities closer, forging new bonds of kinship. One warm summer evening, as you sat outside your thriving settlement, enjoying the lingering daylight, your wife beside you, her hand nestled in yours, you found yourself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought you here. The pain of losing your home remained, a dull ache that never quite disappeared, a phantom limb of memory. You still dreamed sometimes of your village as it was, before the shadow of conquest fell, waking with a sharp pang of loss. But alongside that pain, there was something else, something profound and sustaining. Pride in what you had built from nothing. Satisfaction in the vibrant community you had helped create, a haven in a brutal world. Do you still think about going back? Your wife asked, her voice soft, somehow following the meandering path of your thoughts, as she so often did. You considered the question carefully, the weight of years and memories pressing upon you. I think about what was, you admitted, your gaze sweeping over the peaceful village. But this is our home now. She nodded, understanding the complexity of your feelings, the bittersweet acceptance. Our grandchildren will know England only from our stories. The realization struck you with unexpected force, a poignant truth. Your grandchildren, and all the generations that followed, would be shaped by this displacement. They would be neither fully English nor fully Scottish, but something new, something unique, forged in the crucible of conquest and exile. Then we must tell the stories well, you said, your voice firm with new resolve, so they know where they came from, even as they build something new here. As twilight deepened, bathing the settlement in a soft, ethereal glow, you watched the quiet life unfolding around you. Children played, their laughter echoing in the evening air. Adults finished the day's work, their figures silhouetted against the gathering darkness. Smoke rose in thin columns from cooking fires, carrying the comforting aroma of hearth and home. This wasn't the life you had envisioned, not the peaceful existence of your ancestors in England, but it was the one you had fought to create, painstakingly, from the very ashes of William's destruction. The conquest had changed everything, not just for you and those who had fled, but for those who had remained behind as well. England itself was being transformed, its language, its laws, its very architecture and power structures, all being remade in the Norman image. Yet, something essential remained, carried in the hearts and minds of people like you. The England that existed before 1066 hadn't been completely erased. It lived on in this Scottish settlement, in the fens where here warred, against all odds, still fought, in quiet villages where old women still told Saxon tales to children in the Old English tongue. William had conquered the land, but not the spirit of its people. That spirit endured, adapting and persisting, waiting for the day when Saxon and Norman might eventually blend into something new. Neither fully one nor the other, but a culture forged in the fire of conquest and survival. As night fell fully, and the first stars appeared in the northern sky, you took your wife's hand and headed inside to your simple home. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more small steps toward building a future. For now, that was enough. The Norman Conquest had forever changed what it meant to be English. But here, in exile, you remained defiantly, unmistakably Saxon. 3 years had passed since that desperate flight north, since you arrived as a refugee with nothing but the clothes on your back and the hope in your heart. Your settlement in Scotland had blossomed from a desperate collection of displaced persons into a proper, thriving village. Wooden houses, their carefully thatched roofs now weathered by sun and rain, stood in orderly rows, a testament to enduring effort. Fields of barley, wheat, and oats surrounded the settlement, their green and gold expanse broken by small, carefully tended orchards and vibrant vegetable gardens. Sheep grazed peacefully on the hillsides, providing wool that the women spun and wove into sturdy cloth, a rhythmic hum of industry. Your forge had expanded beyond recognition. No longer just a simple shelter against the elements. It was now a proper workshop, its bellows roaring, its anvils ringing. You had taken on a second apprentice besides your son, a young Scottish boy, eager to learn the intricate craft of the blacksmith, a bridge between two cultures. The ironwork you produced was now known for its exceptional quality throughout the region, bringing traders from as far as Edinburgh to commission intricate pieces, a mark of your growing reputation. Life, though still demanding, had found a settled rhythm. The acute, searing pain of displacement had gradually transformed into a dull ache of nostalgia, a bittersweet longing. You still thought of your English village, but increasingly, this Scottish settlement, built by your own hands and shared endeavor, felt like home. On a crisp autumn morning, as you worked the bellows to bring the forge to a roaring heat, a rider arrived in the village, a lone figure cutting through the morning mist. He was clearly English by his dress and speech, travel-worn and weary, but his urgency was palpable as he sought out the village council. Word spread quickly, a ripple of unease through the morning routine. He brought news from across the border, tidings from the land you had left behind. The villagers gathered, their faces etched with a familiar mixture of apprehension and hope, in the small wooden church that served as both place of worship and meeting hall. The messenger stood before them all, removing his cap as he addressed the assembled community. "I bring news of England," he announced, his voice somber. "Hereward the wake has fallen. The fens have been conquered." A collective murmur, a soft gasp of dismay, ran through the crowd. Hereward, the Saxon nobleman who had, against all odds, maintained a defiant resistance in the marshy fenlands of East Anglia, had become a potent symbol of hope for many English. The messenger nodded grimly, his gaze sweeping over the somber faces. "It's secure now. William's grip tightens by the day. Castles, even mightier than before, rise in every shire, dominating the landscape. Norman lords rule where Saxon thanes once held sway, their foreign accents grating on English ears. French is spoken in court, in church, among the powerful, a language of the conqueror." He paused, taking a breath before delivering the final, unsettling piece of information. But there's more. William has ordered a great accounting of all England. Every hide of land, every ox, every pig, every beehive. They call it the Doomsday Book. This new, unprecedented information caused confused muttering, a ripple of bewilderment. What purpose does this serve? Someone asked, baffled. Taxation, the messenger replied simply, his voice devoid of emotion. William wants to know exactly what his conquest is worth, down to the last penny. No resource will go untaxed, no wealth unclaimed. His control is absolute. After the assembly dispersed, the discussions continued throughout the village, a low hum of worry and resignation. The news confirmed what many had long suspected, a truth they had perhaps unconsciously feared. There would be no quick return to England, no miraculous restoration of the old order. William's conquest was complete, systematically reinforced through architecture, law, language, and now, this unprecedented, meticulous survey of every last resource. The old England was gone, perhaps forever. That evening, around your family hearth, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the wattle and daub walls, your son, now a young man himself, voiced what many younger refugees had begun to feel, a pragmatic acceptance born of lived reality. Perhaps it's time to accept that this is our home now, he said, gesturing to the sturdy walls around you. England belongs to the Normans. Your wife, ever the fierce guardian of memory and identity, gave him a sharp, disapproving look. England belongs to its people, she countered, her voice firm, whether they live there now or here in exile. But what does that mean for us? Your daughter asked, her voice tinged with a quiet desperation. She was married now to a young man from another English settlement, their first child expected in the spring, a tiny new life rooted in this foreign soil. Are we to be forever looking backward, longing for what's lost? Or do we build our future here, truly here? It was a question that deeply divided the exile community, a chasm between generations. The older generation, those who clearly remembered pre-conquest England, tended to maintain stronger emotional ties to the homeland, a tenacious hope for restoration. The younger people, especially those who had been mere children when they fled, or who had been born entirely in Scotland, were more focused on the present reality, their roots growing deeper in Scottish soil with each passing year. As for you, you found yourself increasingly caught between these two perspectives. You cherished your memories of England, those sun-drenched days and familiar customs, but you had also invested years of hard work, of sweat and blood, in creating this new life, this haven. Your most productive years now lay behind you, etched in the lines on your face and the growing stiffness in your joints. Your hair had grayed at the temples, your back ached after a long day at the forge. The thought of starting over yet again, even if a return to England miraculously became possible, exhausted you to your very soul. Winter descended, gripping the northern lands with its customary, unforgiving bite. The air outside the forge was a raw blade, forcing breath from the lungs in frosty plumes. But within the settlement, a profound sense of preparation reigned. Every family had learned this annual ritual well, a grim necessity forged by years of exile. Food stores were meticulously checked, barrels of salted meat and dried grain stacked high in cool cellars. Firewood, meticulously chopped and seasoned, rose in formidable stacks against the outer walls of every dwelling, promising warmth through the long, dark nights. Houses were sealed with pitch and bundled cloth, every crack and crevice meticulously guarded against the creeping fingers of the draft. For you, these winters now brought a different rhythm. Less time was spent wrestling with bellows and hammer yourself, more on the patient transmission of ancient knowledge. Your calloused hands, once solely dedicated to shaping metal, now gently guided those of your son, Edric, and the keen Scottish apprentice, Hamish. You taught them the nuanced song of the anvil, the subtle shift in a blade's temper, the precise breath of the forge that coaxed life from stubborn iron. Their young faces, illuminated by the leaping flames, were a testament to continuity. During the deepest winter days, When blizzards confined the village indoors and outdoor work became impossible, an old tradition held sway. Evenings were given over to communal gatherings in the largest hall, around a roaring central hearth. The flickering firelight danced across the faces of the exiles as stories were spun, tales of a homeland increasingly remote yet impossibly vivid. Over the years, the narratives of Saxon England had taken on mythic proportions, shimmering with the golden haze of memory and longing. Heroes like Harold Godwin's son, whose very name was now a prayer, and Hereward the Wake, the legendary resistance fighter, were painted in ever more magnificent strokes. England itself, in these retellings, became a paradise of rolling green hills, prosperous villages, and a just rule, a golden age cruelly snatched away by Norman greed. You watched the younger generation as these tales unfolded. The children of the settlement, many of them born in Scotland and having never set foot on English soil, listened with a polite, almost reverent attention. To them, these stories were akin to the old legends of saints and ancient Celtic heroes, inspiring, perhaps, but distant, removed from the daily reality of the Scottish hills. Their eyes would occasionally drift, their attention equally captured by the Scottish legends and folklore they learned from neighboring children and local folk. Tales of mischievous fairies and fierce border reivers, figures far more immediate and tangible than a long-dead king. The growing chasm between memory and lived experience was stark. Then, as the grip of winter finally loosened and the first tentative promises of spring unfurled across the thawing landscape, new whispers began to drift across the border from England. Rumors solidified into undeniable fact, carried by a lone, travel-worn merchant who rode into the settlement one blustery March afternoon. William the Conqueror was dead. The news hit the community like a physical blow, followed by a rush of complex, warring emotions. This was the king who had irrevocably transformed England, who had ordered the infamous harrying of the North, that had scorched your home and driven you into this cold exile. He had died on September 9th, 1087, succumbing to injuries sustained during the brutal siege of Mantes in France. The reports that followed, carried by later travelers, spoke of his final hours filled with expressions of remorse for the unimaginable bloodshed of his conquests, particularly the widespread devastation inflicted upon northern England. A bitter laugh escaped Godric's lips as the news was shared amongst the leaders. "Too late for regrets," he muttered, his voice hoarse with old pain. "The dead remain dead. The burned villages remain ashes." The sentiment echoed silently in every exile's heart. What good was a conqueror's deathbed contrition to those whose lives had been irrevocably shattered? A brief, fierce flicker of hope ignited amongst the exiles. Would William's passing finally weaken the iron grip of Norman control? Could this transition of power open a window, however small, for their return or even, impossibly, a Saxon restoration? The answer arrived swiftly, dousing the nascent hope with cold water. William's second son, William Rufus, had seized the English throne, while his eldest, Robert, inherited Normandy itself. This division inevitably sparked tension between the brothers, but it offered no immediate crack in the Norman facade for the English exiles. The Norman grip on England continued, seemingly uninterrupted, a permanent shadow cast over their homeland. More gruesome details of William's end filtered across the border in the weeks that followed, carried by gossiping traders and mercenary soldiers. His body, bloated enormously in his later years, proved too massive for the stone sarcophagus prepared for it. When attendants, with grunting effort, attempted to force the corpulent remains into the coffin, the corpse dramatically burst, filling the hallowed church with such a terrible, sickening stench that the funeral had to be concluded with unseemly haste. This grotesquely undignified and brought a grim, if hollow, satisfaction to the exiles. Even in death, someone joked darkly, the words met with nervous, mirthless laughter. He brought suffering to those around him. There was a morbid pleasure in picturing the arrogant conqueror denied even a dignified burial. But the initial, fervent hope that William's death might somehow alter the exile's predicament soon faded. His son, William Rufus, appeared to be consolidating his power with ruthless efficiency. The Norman occupation of England would, it seemed, continue just as before. As summer unfolded across the Scottish Highlands, your family experienced both the profound sweetness of joy and the sharp sting of renewed sorrow. Your daughter gave birth to a healthy son, your first grandchild. The tiny bundle, with wisps of blonde hair and bright, curious eyes, was a beacon of hope, a new branch on the family tree. He was given a traditional Saxon name, a small but defiant act of cultural preservation, a common practice now in the settlement where every birth was a quiet affirmation of their heritage. But within weeks of this happy event, word arrived, carried by a somber rider, that your wife's beloved brother had died. He had remained in England after the harrying, one of the few who had managed to make a precarious peace with the new Norman lord of his region, retaining a small, often grudgingly granted, portion of his ancestral land. Yet, he had never truly recovered from the profound hardships and losses of those terrible years. The news tore open old wounds, raw and still festering. Your wife's grief was not merely for her brother, but for the agonizing separation that had prevented her from seeing him one last time, from saying a proper goodbye. The conquest, with its brutal efficiency, had not only seized land and lives, but had also permanently divided families, creating unbridgeable distances between people once bound by blood and affection. I should have been there. She wept into your shoulder, her body shaking with sobs. To say goodbye properly. You held her close, feeling the depth of her despair, knowing there were no words, no comforting phrases that could ease this particular, searing pain. The Norman Conquest, even after all these years, continued to exact its devastating, personal price. In the wake of this profound personal loss, a visitor arrived, inadvertently bringing a different perspective on life under Norman rule. He was a seasoned merchant, his face weathered by countless journeys, who traveled regularly between the bustling markets of England and the smaller settlements of Scotland, trading precious wool for finished cloth and other goods. Having business with the settlement's growing economy, he accepted your hospitality for the night. Over the evening meal, by the comforting glow of the hearth, you found yourself drawn into conversation, asking him about conditions in England, now nearly 20 years after the conquest had begun. It depends greatly on where one looks, he replied thoughtfully, swirling the ale in his cup before taking a long, contemplative draught. In the north, where William's harrying left such unimaginable devastation, recovery has been painfully slow. Fields that once produced abundant grain still lie fallow, choked with weeds, the soil remembering the fire and neglect. Village sites, once vibrant hubs, remain abandoned, their ghostly ruins picked apart by time and the elements. He paused, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. The Doomsday Survey, the great census, records them simply as waste, worthless for taxation, worthless for life. This grim assessment only confirmed what you had heard from other, infrequent sources. The destruction inflicted upon Yorkshire and the surrounding counties had been so absolute, its effects so complete, that its shadow would linger for generations, a gaping wound on the land. But elsewhere, the merchant continued, shifting in his seat. Life continues. People adapt. They must, to survive. He took another drink, his eyes meeting yours with a knowing glint. The Norman lords can be harsh masters, often demanding far higher rents and services than Saxon lords typically required. And French, without question, is the language of the courts, of the nobility, of the church hierarchy. To rise, to wield power, one must speak the conqueror's tongue. Yet, in the fields, in the workshops, in the hearth-lit homes, people still speak English. The old tongue persists, and they remember what came before. You asked, leaning forward, a desperate hope in your voice. Or is the old England, our England, being forgotten? The merchant considered this, his brow furrowed. The old remember, yes. They tell stories, much as you do here. But for the young, especially those born since the conquest, The Norman order is simply the way of the world. They have known nothing else. For them, it is not a disruption, but a given. His words resonated deeply with what you had observed within your own settlement, particularly the growing generational divide in how exile itself was experienced. For your grandson and other children born in Scotland, England existed primarily as the vivid, almost mythological stories spun by their parents and grandparents. It was a land of legend, not of immediate reality. There is one curious development, though, the merchant added, a faint smile playing on his lips. In some places, Norman lords have begun to adapt to English ways. They marry English women, often for land and alliance, but their children grow up hearing English from their nurses and servants. Some even prefer English food and drink to what they knew in Normandy. The sharp, unfamiliar tastes of their ancestral lands become less appealing than the hearty, familiar flavors of England. His smile widened, a hint of irony in his eyes. The conquerors, it seems, are perhaps being slowly conquered in turn, not by arms, but by the subtle, everyday influences of the land they've taken. This unexpected idea that English culture might gradually, imperceptibly, transform the Norman rulers themselves, offered a new, albeit fragile, kind of hope. Not the swift, glorious restoration once dreamed of, but a slower, subtler reconciliation, a blending that might eventually forge something entirely new, neither fully Norman nor fully Saxon. The merchant departed the next morning, leaving behind not just the scent of his foreign spices, but also his observations, which lingered in your thoughts like embers. Could the deep, agonizing divisions created by the conquest eventually heal through this gradual cultural blending? Might your grandchildren, or their children's children, someday return to an England where the sharp, brutal distinctions between Norman and Saxon had softened, blurred into a new, shared identity? Summer melted into a gloriously abundant autumn. The harvest was rich, a cause for celebration throughout the settlement, a reminder of their hard-won prosperity in this adopted land. Your grandson, now a sturdy toddler, grew stronger daily, beginning to crawl with adventurous determination and babble his first recognizable words. Your son, Edric, managed the forge with increasing independence, his confidence growing with each successful project, allowing you more time to rest your aging, weary body. Life, finally, settled into comfortable, predictable patterns. Then, as the leaves turned a riot of gold and crimson across the hillsides, unexpected visitors arrived. A Norman knight, his imposing figure cloaked in the unfamiliar richness of his office, accompanied by two mounted soldiers whose armor glinted ominously, and, perhaps most surprising, an English translator. Their sudden appearance sent an immediate, chilling ripple of alarm through the settlement. Whispers ran like wildfire. Had King Malcolm's famed protection somehow failed? Were the Normans now actively pursuing the exiles even into the remote reaches of Scotland? The visitors made their way directly to the center of the settlement, their horses' hooves clattering loudly on the packed earth, drawing out Godric and the other community leaders, including yourself, to confront them. The translator, a middle-aged Englishman whose refined speech bespoke an education in the church, stepped forward, addressing you in the familiar, comforting cadences of your shared tongue. Sir Robert de Beaumont. He indicated the imposing knight with a deferential gesture. Lord of Alnwick by grant of King William Rufus, comes in peace to deliver a message to the English settlements. Despite his words, tension in the air remained thick, palpable. The translator continued, his voice calm but authoritative. King William Rufus offers terms to English exiles who wish to return to their homeland. Those who swear loyalty to him and accept Norman lordship may reclaim lands, not their ancestral holdings, which have long since been granted to Norman lords, but new allocations in regions still underpopulated due to the troubles of recent years. A collective murmur, a ripple of disbelief and dawning hope, spread through the gathered crowd. Return to England, after all these long, bitter years? It seemed both utterly impossible and achingly, deeply tempting. Why this offer now? Godric asked, his voice sharp with suspicion, his eyes narrowed. The translator conferred briefly, in quick, hushed French, with the Norman knight, who nodded impassively. Then he turned back to the exiles. King William faces challenges from his brother Robert in Normandy. He seeks to secure his northern border against possible Scottish intervention. Having English settlers loyal to him in these regions would strengthen his position, creating a buffer against any incursions. The political calculation was brutally clear. William Rufus was not offering reconciliation out of kindness or a change of heart, but from cold, strategic necessity. Still, it represented the first genuine opportunity for a legal return to England since their forced exile began. Those interested should present themselves at Alnwick Castle before winter, the translator concluded, his voice firm. Terms will be formalized there. I remind you that this is an opportunity, not a demand. Those who prefer to remain in Scotland may do so without penalty. After the Norman party departed, their horses' hoofbeats slowly fading into the autumn air, the settlement erupted into a tumultuous debate. The community splintered immediately, arguments flaring up like sparks from a flint. Some, scarred by indelible memories of the harrying, immediately dismissed the offer as a treacherous trap, a cunning way to lure exiles back, only to punish them for their flight, or worse, to bind them in even harsher servitude. Others, however, saw it as a genuine, if imperfect, opportunity to reclaim their English identity, to walk upon English soil once more, even under the restrictive conditions of Norman lordship. Families were fiercely divided on the question. Older exiles, who remembered the terror and brutality of the harrying vividly, instinctively distrusted any Norman proposal, their skepticism rooted in deep, unhealed trauma. Younger people, particularly those who struggled to fully establish themselves in the Scottish settlement or who harbored ambitions for a grander life, saw potential opportunity in starting afresh on English soil, a chance to rebuild and prosper. Your own family reflected these profound divisions. Your son, Edric, confident in his honed skills as a blacksmith and eager for new challenges, believed he could prosper in England, where the need for skilled craftsmen must surely be great in those newly resettled, underpopulated regions. Your daughter and her husband, however, were far more hesitant, their primary concern being the welfare and safety of their infant son in such a disruptive transition. As for you and your wife, you found yourselves weighing a complex, heavy mix of factors. The pull of your homeland, dormant but ever-present, remained powerfully strong. The chance to die and finally be buried in English soil, to rest amongst your ancestors, held a deep, almost spiritual meaning. But you had built a life here, forged a new identity, and established a respected place within this Scottish community. At your age, contemplating another upheaval, another uprooting, felt like an insurmountable challenge, a physical and emotional toll you were unsure you could bear. The debate raged for days, consuming the settlement's collective energy, with individual families eventually making their own agonizing decisions. Some, spurred by hope or desperation, immediately began preparations to depart, aiming to cross the border before winter's harsh grip made travel impossible. Others reaffirmed their commitment to the Scottish settlement, viewing it now truly as home, a place of belonging rather than a temporary refuge. In the end, approximately a third of the community, driven by a blend of hope, pragmatism, and longing, decided to accept the Norman offer. The partings were profoundly emotional. These people had shared unimaginable experiences of loss, flight, and the arduous, hopeful process of rebuilding. Bonds forged in such circumstances ran deep, etched into their very souls. Your own family's decision did not come easily, born of long, often tense discussions that sometimes flared into arguments, tears, and passionate pleas. Finally, a difficult compromise was reached. Your son, Edric, full of youthful vigor and ambition, would return to England to establish himself in the new territory. If conditions proved genuinely favorable, if the promises held true, your daughter and her family might consider joining him later. You and your wife, however, would remain in Scotland, at least for now. I've moved enough for one lifetime, you told your son, your voice thick with emotion, as he prepared for departure. But perhaps I'll visit, if these old bones allow it. The day of departure arrived, crisp and clear, bathed in the pale, hopeful light of an autumn morning. Those leaving had packed their wagons with essential supplies, their meager belongings, and the intangible weight of hope for a new beginning. Children, oblivious to the deeper gravitas of the moment, ran excited circles around the preparations, their laughter like bright bells. Adults exchanged heartfelt embraces, promises to send word when possible, and long, lingering looks that tried to convey unspoken fears and hopes. As you embraced your son, a potent mix of pride and apprehension swelling in your chest, you pressed something small and cold into his hand. It was a simple iron amulet, one you had forged yourself years ago, incorporating ancient Saxon knotwork designs, a quiet, potent symbol of his heritage. So you remember who you are, you told him, your voice hoarse, even in a Norman England. He fastened it around his neck, the dark metal gleaming against his skin, a promise unspoken yet understood. I'll never forget, he vowed, his eyes meeting yours, resolute. And I'll teach my children when I have them. Then, with a final, lingering nod, he mounted his horse, a significant purchase, made with the proceeds from selling his share of the forge to your now partner, Hamish, the Scottish apprentice. He joined the departing group, his figure slowly merging with the others as they headed south. You watched until their wagons and mounted figures disappeared around the bend in the winding road, your wife's hand tight in yours, both of you wondering, with a deep, aching certainty, if you would ever see your son again. Winter truly arrived then, wrapping the settlement in a profound blanket of snow and silence. The forge continued to operate, its rhythmic clang a comforting anchor, though less actively than before. Your former apprentice, Hamish, now a full partner, handled most of the arduous physical work, his Scottish strength well suited to the heavy labor, while you supervised, advised, and slowly ceded more responsibility. Your days developed a new, gentler pattern. Mornings were spent at the forge, overseeing Hamish and occasional new apprentices, the heat a welcome antidote to the pervasive cold. Afternoons found you with your daughter and growing grandson, delighting in his innocent wonder, the sheer joy of his presence a balm to your heart. Evenings were spent by the crackling fire with your wife, sharing memories, old and new, and finding quiet comfort in simple companionship. As midwinter approached, the time for reflection deepened. You found yourself often pondering the improbable, arduous journey that had brought you here. The Norman Conquest had shattered your world with the force of a blacksmith's hammer, driving you from your home, from your very identity, forcing you to rebuild from absolute nothingness. The suffering had been immense, the losses incalculable, etched into your very being. Nothing, you knew, could ever fully compensate for what William's armies had brutally taken from you and countless other English people. Yet, here you sat, in a warm, sturdy house built by your own hands, your daughter and grandson thriving nearby, your beloved wife still by your side after all these years of unimaginable hardship. You had not just survived. You had helped create a community, a sanctuary that meticulously preserved elements of English culture that might otherwise have been irrevocably lost. Your ancient skills, passed down through generations of blacksmiths, had now been passed to a new generation, a Scotsman and an Englishman, who would carry them forward into an uncertain future. It wasn't the life you would have chosen, not by any measure. But facing unimaginable disruption, you and your fellow exiles had found profound ways to endure, to adapt, to carve out meaning and purpose amidst the brutal reality of displacement. There was a quiet, unassuming victory in that, you realized, though few in the wider world would ever recognize it as such. The first letter from your son arrived with the nascent breath of spring, carried north by a diligent trader. His handwriting was uncertain, almost hesitant. Literacy, after all, was not typically part of a blacksmith's practical training. But the message, painstakingly scrawled, was clear and resonated with powerful emotion. He had established himself in a small village south of the River Tees, a place that, by his description, seemed to be thriving under a Norman lord who was fair-minded for his kind. Edric's skills were evidently in high demand, and he had been granted a small plot of land to build his own forge and a modest home. "There are many English here," he wrote, his words carefully formed. "Though the lord and his men are Norman, we speak our own tongue among ourselves." The village was abandoned after the harrying and is being resettled now. The Norman lord seems eager for skilled craftsmen, especially those who can repair agricultural tools and weapons. The letter continued, detailing the challenges of rebuilding in an area that still bore the profound, enduring scars of William's destruction. But beneath the hardships, there was a palpable current of optimism, a sense that something new, something vital, was emerging from the ashes of the old order. "It is strange to walk English soil again," your son concluded, "both familiar and foreign at once. I think of you often, and hope you may visit when summer makes travel easier." You read the letter aloud to your family that evening, your voice trembling slightly with emotion. Your daughter listened intently, her brow furrowed in thought, clearly weighing whether her family might eventually join her brother in this new, partially restored English life. Your wife said little, her gaze fixed on the fire, but you noticed her discreetly wiping away tears when she thought you weren't looking, a quiet testament to her enduring grief and hope. As for yourself, you felt a complex, swirling mixture of emotions, a deep swell of pride in your son's resilience and enterprise, a profound curiosity about this new, Norman-ruled England he described, a lingering, persistent anger at the historical forces that had necessitated this painful separation, and, despite everything, an enduring, persistent longing for the homeland you had once known. Later that night, unable to sleep, you quietly stepped outside your house. The vast, inky Scottish sky stretched above you, an infinite canvas where stars were scattered across its darkness like countless silver filings on a smith's workshop floor. The air, crisp and cool, carried the first subtle, softening hints of spring, a silent promise of renewal and rebirth. You thought about your own extraordinary journey, from a proud Saxon blacksmith in a settled land to a desperate refugee, and now, improbably, to a respected elder of an exile community in a foreign land. None of it was what you had expected or wanted. All of it had been brutally shaped by the massive, unstoppable historical forces unleashed when William of Normandy had decided to press his audacious claim to the English throne. Yet, standing there under the vast, indifferent sky, you realized something profoundly important. The Norman Conquest had indeed changed everything, but it hadn't ended everything. English life, in its tenacious, adaptable forms, continued both here in this Scottish settlement and back in England itself, where your son now worked metal, just as generations of your family had done before him. The language, the customs, the ancient skills that defined your people had survived, adapting to bewildering new circumstances while stubbornly maintaining essential, unbroken connections to the past. William's armies could burn villages, destroy crops, and slaughter livestock. They could replace English nobles with Norman ones, English bishops with Norman clergy. They could impose new laws, a new language in the halls of power, new systems of land ownership and obligation. But they, you realized, could not erase the deeper, more profound currents of culture and identity that flowed, unseen but undeniable, through generations. Those currents continued, sometimes underground, sometimes altered by contact with new influences, but never, ever fully extinguished. As you turned to go back inside, drawn by the warmth of your home and the comforting presence of your wife, you felt a curious sense of peace settling over you. Not because the pain of displacement had vanished, it never would, you knew that now, but because you had come to understand that your own personal story, your family's story, was part of something far larger, something that continued unfolding even beyond your lifetime. Your grandson would grow up in this Scottish settlement, or perhaps, eventually, in England, carrying forward elements of Saxon heritage blended with new, Scottish and Norman influences. His children and grandchildren would do the same, each generation making its own unique adaptations while meticulously maintaining connections to what came before. This, you realized, was also a powerful, quiet form of resistance. Not the dramatic, bloody resistance of battlefield confrontation, but the quieter, infinitely more enduring resistance of cultural persistence, generation after generation, despite every attempt to suppress or replace it. Inside, your wife had woken and sat by the rekindled fire, her gaze soft, knowing. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice a gentle murmur in the quiet room. You shook your head, settling beside her, drawing her close. "Thinking about our son, about England, about everything that's changed." She nodded, understanding, as she always did. "And everything that hasn't." Her simple, profound words perfectly captured exactly what you had been feeling in the vast darkness outside. In the midst of conquest, displacement, and reinvention, something essential remained continuous, unbroken. The bonds of family, the tenacious threads of cultural memory, skills passed from hand to hand, stories told and retold by flickering firelight. The fire crackled softly as you sat together in comfortable, shared silence, two survivors of a historical cataclysm who had found profound ways to carry forward what mattered most, despite everything that had been irrevocably lost. Outside, the Scottish night continued its slow, inexorable progression toward dawn. Inside, warmed by fire and the profound comfort of companionship, you found yourself looking toward the future with a cautious, fragile hope. Not for the impossible restoration of what once was, but for the continued, vibrant evolution of what your people, your heritage, might yet become in this new, complex world, forever shaped by conquest and resistance, by loss and adaptation, by endless ending and beginning. 2 years had passed since your son, Edric, had returned to England. His letters arrived sporadically, carried by various merchants and travelers making the long, often perilous journey between the two countries. Each one, carefully unfurled and deciphered, provided a precious window into the evolving, complex reality of Norman-ruled England, now over 2 decades since the conquest first began. "The changes are everywhere," he wrote in his most recent letter, his hand more practiced now. "Great stone churches rise where simpler wooden ones once stood, reaching impossibly high. Our Norman lord has begun construction of a grand hall, unlike anything we knew in Saxon times, its walls thick and unyielding. Even the fields are worked differently, with new methods and implements brought from across the sea, yielding richer harvests in some places." But his letters also diligently described continuities, the threads of the old world that stubbornly persisted. English was still spoken, universally, in homes and fields, in markets and taverns. Old festivals and seasonal observances were still celebrated, often alongside new Norman ones, a vibrant tapestry of blended traditions. Traditional crafting techniques, like your own blacksmithing, were maintained, even as new innovations were slowly introduced. The picture that emerged was of 2 distinct cultures existing in uneasy, parallel coexistence, sometimes clashing openly, sometimes subtly blending into something new and unforeseen. "You should see it for yourself," your son concluded, a clear invitation resonating in his words. "The road is safe enough now for those who cause no trouble. Come when summer makes travel easier. I have room in my house, and there are matters we should discuss face to face." This unexpected invitation stirred something long dormant within you, a deep, aching current of longing. Despite meticulously crafting a new life in Scotland, in your heart, England had never ceased to be home. The thought of seeing it again, even in England transformed and scarred by Norman influence, pulled at you powerfully, an almost physical ache. "We should go," your wife said suddenly, her voice firm, resolute, when you shared the letter. Her decisiveness surprised you. "I'm not getting any younger. If I'm to see English soil again before I die, it should be soon." Her eyes held a mixture of grief and fierce determination. Your daughter, however, was less enthusiastic, her protective instincts on high alert. "It's dangerous," she argued, her voice laced with worry. "The Normans might still view returned exiles with suspicion, and you are not as young as you once were." She now had a second child, a spirited daughter, and the instinct to shield her family from harm was powerfully strong within her. But after much discussion, weighing risks against the deep-seated yearning, a plan slowly began to form. You and your wife would make the journey alone, leaving your daughter and her young family safely in the familiar confines of Scotland. The trip would take place in midsummer, when the roads were dry and the days long and bright. A trusted merchant, who regularly plied the trade routes between Edinburgh and York, would guide you for the initial, most challenging part of the journey, and your son would meet you at a predetermined location for the final, shorter leg. Preparations consumed the spring months. Though the journey wasn't enormous by distance, perhaps 200 miles, it represented a significant, even daunting, undertaking for two people of your advanced age. You found yourself meticulously forging small, exquisite iron items, amulets, buckles, household tools, to trade along the way, your practiced hands still capable of intricate work. Your wife, with her characteristic practicality, sewed sturdy travel garments from thick wool and prepared an array of traditional remedies for common ailments, carefully wrapped and stored in small leather pouches. The settlement watched these preparations with a complex mix of emotions. Some elders viewed your planned journey with thinly veiled envy, their own longing to see England again palpable, but lacking the means or strength for such a perilous trip. Others worried openly, suggesting you were undertaking an unnecessary, even foolish, risk. A few, more subtly, even hinted that returning, even temporarily, represented a kind of surrender to Norman dominance, a betrayal of their shared exile. "You've become important to us here, old friend," Godric told you privately, his voice heavy with respect. "Your knowledge, your counsel, the community will feel your absence." His words touched you deeply. From desperate, unwanted refugees, you and your wife had transformed into valued, central members of a thriving, resilient settlement. There was a profound pride in that transformation, a sense of having created something meaningful and enduring from the ashes of displacement. "We'll return, Godric," you assured him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This is our home now, our true home. But I need to see my son and England one last time." The day of departure arrived with fair weather and what you felt were favorable omens, the sun warm on your face. Your daughter's family accompanied you to the very edge of the settlement, their faces etched with a poignant mixture of love and apprehension. The goodbye was both deeply emotional and carefully restrained. Your people, forged in the crucible of loss and separation, had learned that partings need not be permanent, that connections could be maintained and cherished across vast distances. "Bring me a stone from English soil," your grandson requested, his young face solemn, his eyes wide with earnestness. "So I can know my other home." "I promise," you told him, ruffling his fair hair affectionately, the weight of his request a solemn pledge. The journey south began easily enough. Your merchant guide, a jovial but shrewd man, kept a steady but manageable pace, and the midsummer roads were relatively dry and free of excessive mud. You and your wife rode sturdy ponies, purchased for the journey at significant expense, but a necessary investment given the considerable distance ahead. As you traveled, the landscape slowly, perceptibly, began to change. The rugged, untamed Scottish terrain gradually gave way to gentler, more cultivated hills and broader, fertile valleys. Villages, small and often isolated at first, appeared more frequently, their fields stretching between them in patchwork patterns of green and gold. You began to notice subtle differences in the building styles, the cut and weave of people's clothing, even the slightly altered rhythm of their speech. The actual crossing into England was both momentous and, curiously, anticlimactic. There was no great wall or imposing gate marking the border, no triumphal arch. Instead, it was a gradual, almost imperceptible transition from one jurisdiction, one subtle cultural sphere, to another. Yet, the profound knowledge that you were once again on English soil, after all these years of aching exile, brought a flood of overwhelming emotion. Your wife reached for your hand as you rode, her fingers intertwining with yours, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It still feels like home," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, "despite everything." As you traveled deeper into England, the most visible, undeniable signs of Norman rule began to appear with increasing frequency and starkness. Great castles, colossal stone fortresses, rose majestically from strategic hilltops, dominating the surrounding countryside. These were not the hasty, temporary wooden structures erected in the immediate years after the conquest, but imposing, permanent stone fortifications, clearly built to last for generations. They were physical manifestations of Norman power, of Norman permanence, undeniable declarations of their absolute dominion. The villages you passed revealed the mixed, uneven reality of England under Norman lordship. Some thrived, showing signs of new construction and bustling, lively markets, adapting to the new order with pragmatic vigor. Others, however, remained half-deserted, still visibly recovering from the widespread devastation of the conquest and its brutal aftermath, their abandoned hovels and fallow fields testament to lives shattered and never rebuilt. In the north, especially, where William's harrying had left such profound, indelible scars, abandoned fields and gaunt, crumbling ruins testified to what was irrevocably lost. You heard French spoken by the mounted knights and their attendants, their arrogant tones cutting through the air as they passed you on the road, while English continued, steadfast and resilient, as the common language of the farmers in their fields, the craftsmen in their workshops, and the merchants haggling in the nascent markets. Two worlds existed, starkly defined, yet inexorably drawn together by the very ground they shared. As you sought shelter for the night at a bustling inn, the scent of stale ale and wood smoke filling the air, the innkeeper, a man with a wary eye and calloused hands, recognized you and your wife as returning exiles. In a voice lowered to a conspiratorial murmur amidst the clatter of tankards and the drone of unfamiliar French from a distant table, he offered his guarded perspective. The first years were brutal, he confessed, his gaze flickering nervously towards the entrance. Unspeakable. He spoke of the new Norman lords, insatiable in their demands, extracting more than the old Saxon nobility ever dared, punishing resistance with swift, merciless brutality. He recounted tales of crops seized, homes burned, and families scattered for even the slightest defiance. Yet, a subtle shift had occurred. Things had settled, he admitted with a cautious sigh. Some of the conquerors, those with a modicum of foresight, had begun to understand a fundamental truth. A lord could only truly prosper if his English tenants were likewise healthy and productive. Others, however, remained harsh masters, their iron wills unbroken. He offered a weary shrug, a gesture of profound resignation. It depends greatly on where you find yourself, and under whose authority, he concluded, the unspoken fragility of their lives hanging in the air. This fragmented insight resonated deeply with the details gleaned from your son's infrequent, precious letters. His words had hinted at the disparate realities of Norman rule, a patchwork quilt of governance that varied wildly by region and by the whim of each individual lord. There was no singular, monolithic English experience of the conquest, but rather 1,000 different accommodations, a myriad of nuanced resistances, and countless quiet adaptations playing out across the fractured landscape. The following morning, after a heartfelt farewell to your merchant guide, you and your wife continued your journey south, your destination the meeting place arranged with your son. The countryside here bore subtle, yet undeniable, evidence of the harrying of the north, a scar etched into the very earth. Fewer villages dotted the horizon than you remembered from your youth. Once fertile fields now lay fallow, slowly yielding to the encroaching wilderness. Occasional skeletal ruins, the husks of former homes or churches, stood like silent sentinels in the distance, stark reminders of the devastation. Yet, amidst the somber remnants, there were also burgeoning signs of recovery. New timber frames pierced the sky, fields were being painstakingly reclaimed from the wild, and the faint, resilient pulse of life continued, asserting itself despite the profound rupture of 2 decades past. By midday, you reached the designated meeting point, a crossroads marked by a towering, ancient stone, its surface smoothed by centuries of wind and rain. Your son had not yet arrived, so you and your wife found respite in the dappled shade of a magnificent, sprawling oak, sharing a modest meal of bread and cheese bought in the last village. The quiet vigil was punctuated only by the rustling leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Strange to think, mused your wife, her fingers idly sifting through the dark, rich soil, that this is the same earth we walked before everything changed. It feels the same, smells the same. You understood the profound simplicity of her words. The land itself, ancient and unyielding, remained a constant beneath the shifting human arrangements imposed upon it. Saxon, Norman, these were merely temporary distinctions, fleeting impositions against the deeper, eternal continuity of the earth itself. Your reflections were abruptly shattered by the rhythmic thud of approaching hoofbeats, a sound that brought a sudden rush of anticipation to your chest. Around the bend in the dusty road, your son appeared, astride a sturdy, well-fed horse, a mount far superior to any he could have afforded in his former life. 2 years had passed since your last sighting, and he was unmistakably changed. His bearing was more confident, his shoulders broader, his fine wool clothes spoke of a comfortable prosperity. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but carried the healthy glow of one who worked hard but thrived. The reunion was a joyous explosion of embraces, exclamations of relief, and tearful declarations of how well each of you looked despite the passage of time and hardship. Your son had thoughtfully brought a second horse, a gentle mare, for the remainder of the journey to his village. "You'll stay through harvest," he insisted, his voice firm with hospitality. "I've prepared everything. The local lord has been informed of your visit and raises no objection. You're welcome in England, at least in my corner of it." The final leg of the journey took you through countryside that grew increasingly familiar, each passing mile igniting dormant memories. Though you had never lived precisely in this specific region, the patterns of settlement, the distinctive style of fieldstone walls, the particular species of ancient oak and gnarled hawthorn, all resonated with the landscapes of your ancestral home. This was not just England. This was northern England, the distinctive, beloved vistas of your forebears. As you crested a low, rolling hill, your son's village finally came into view. A modest collection of perhaps 30 timber-framed households, their thatched roofs nestled cozily around a sturdy stone church. Fields, meticulously tilled and now heavy with the promise of harvest, radiated outward like spokes from a wheel. A small stream, its banks thickly dotted with graceful willows, wound its way nearby, a ribbon of silver in the afternoon sun. Beyond the village, standing in subtle contrast, rose a manor house of clear Norman design, its architecture more severe, less organic than the traditional English dwellings. Further still, almost a smudge on the distant horizon, you could discern the formidable outline of a castle. "The lord lives primarily at the castle," your son explained, following your gaze, a hint of weariness in his tone. "The manor house is occupied by his steward, who oversees the estate. We see little of the lord himself, which most consider a blessing." Your son's own home, set comfortably near the edge of the village, was a substantial timber-framed house with a meticulously maintained thatched roof. Nearby, a testament to his continued industry and success, stood his forge, larger, better equipped, and far more prosperous than the humble one he had left behind in Scotland. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, a sign of constant activity, tended in his absence by a gangly English youth, his apprentice, who emerged, blinking in the sunlight, to greet your arrival with nervous, respectful deference. "This is my father," your son announced, his voice brimming with evident pride. "The smith who taught me everything I know." The interior of your son's home immediately revealed a level of prosperity and comfort far beyond what he could have achieved in the nascent Scottish settlement. Good, sturdy wooden furniture graced the main room. Richly woven hangings adorned the whitewashed walls, and adequate provisions, stored neatly in ceramic vessels, spoke of security and foresight. It became clear that the Norman Conquest, for all its immense human cost and injustice, had inadvertently allowed commerce to flourish in certain ways, creating new opportunities for skilled craftsmen like your son. There was demand for new styles, new forms, new tools. Even more surprising, however, was the woman who emerged gracefully from the back room to greet you. A young English woman, her face gentle and welcoming, with a wide-eyed toddler balanced confidently on her hip. Your son's confident bearing momentarily faltered, his expression turning sheepish. "I meant to tell you in my letters," he stammered, a blush rising to his cheeks. "This is Edith, my wife, and our son Alfred." This wholly unexpected development, a daughter-in-law and grandson you knew absolutely nothing about, momentarily rendered you speechless. Your wife, however, recovered first, her maternal instincts surging forth. With a joyful cry, she stepped forward, embracing the young woman warmly and exclaiming with delight over the curious, bright-eyed child. Later that evening, as twilight deepened and the household settled around the comforting glow of the hearth fire, you learned the full story. Edith was the daughter of a local farmer, one of the precious few who had managed, through timely submission to the new Norman authority, to retain his lands after the conquest. Her marriage to your son had not only provided him with a family, but had also strategically connected him to the established community, helping to solidify and secure his position in this new, complex world. "Her father has been invaluable in teaching me the local ways," your son explained, his arm resting protectively around Edith. "Which Norman officials can be trusted, which are corrupt, how to navigate the new systems of law and taxation, what truly matters to the local folk." It became profoundly clear that your son had not merely survived, but had fashioned a good, thriving life here, not by rejecting his Saxon heritage, but by thoughtfully adapting it to the harsh new realities. He now spoke a few words of French, enough to communicate effectively with Norman authorities. He had learned the new measurements and the new money systems imposed by the conquerors, integrating them into his daily life and trade. Yet, within the sanctuary of his home, English was still spoken, Saxon traditions lovingly maintained. "The boy will know both worlds," he told you, his gaze soft as he watched young Alfred happily playing on the floor. "The England that was, and the England that is becoming. He'll need that to thrive." In the days that followed, you immersed yourself in the vibrant, resilient life of the village. Much was comfortingly familiar. The ancient rhythms of agricultural work, the spontaneous social gatherings at day's end, the communal observance of weekly church rituals. But the indelible mark of Norman influence was also everywhere. In the stark, sturdy architecture of the stone church, in the regular, formal visits of the Lord's representatives collecting taxes and rents, in the occasional, fleeting passage of mounted knights, their rapid French sharp, alien sound as they rode through the village. You spent hours at your son's forge, working metal alongside him, just as in earlier, simpler years. His skill had not merely endured but had continued to develop, deepening and expanding in remarkable ways. He had mastered new techniques, styles you never had the opportunity to learn, adapting to the demands of Norman patrons who often desired decorative metalwork in ornate styles unfamiliar to the more austere Saxon tradition. Yet, even as he embraced the new, he also meticulously maintained the old ways, patiently teaching his apprentice the time-honored techniques passed down through generations of Saxon smiths. "Some methods can't be improved upon," he would tell the eager boy, his hammer ringing against the anvil. "These were perfected long before the Normans came." The villagers, learning of your history and your journey from exile, treated you with respectful curiosity. Many had relatives who had fled north during the harrying, seeking refuge from the devastation. They asked earnestly about life in Scotland, about the English settlements there, about whether King Malcolm truly welcomed Saxon refugees. Some even, in hushed, private moments, inquired about opportunities for them should Norman rule become unbearable. Is it better there? One farmer asked you privately, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. You considered the question carefully, weighing your words. Different, you finally answered, the single word carrying a world of unspoken meaning. We've built something good from nothing, but it was hard-won, and much was lost along the way. The man nodded slowly, understanding the profound complexity behind your seemingly simple words. Sometimes I think of leaving, he admitted, his gaze drifting over his fields. When the Norman collectors take so much we barely survive winter. But this land has been my family's for generations. Leaving feels like final defeat. You recognize the profound dilemma, the same one you had faced years ago, though under more immediate, terrifying threat. To stay and adapt to conquest, or to leave to preserve a cherished independence. There was no perfect answer, only different compromises, each carrying its own burden and its own fragile hope. As summer inexorably advanced towards harvest, signaling the approaching time for your return journey to Scotland before winter made travel treacherous, you found yourself increasingly reflective. You observed the strange, organic hybrid culture emerging in this once devastated region. The village still maintained its cherished Saxon seasonal celebrations, but now alongside newly introduced Norman feast days. Children played games with rules passed down for generations, their laughter echoing through the lanes, but also learned new ones, boisterous and unfamiliar, introduced by Norman settlers. The blacksmith's craft, a microcosm of this blend, incorporated techniques from both traditions, creating items that would have been recognized by neither a purely Saxon nor a purely Norman smith of the previous generation. Something new was undeniably being forged here, a resilient tapestry woven from two disparate threads. Not purely Saxon, not purely Norman, but a gradual, organic amalgamation born of sheer necessity and close proximity. You saw it most clearly in the youngest children, those who had never known a world before the conquest. To them, this blended reality, with its mix of languages, customs, and influences, was simply England, the only England they had ever known. Your wife, ever observant, noticed it too. They're becoming something else, she mused one evening, her eyes fixed on young Alfred. Not what we were, not what the Normans were. Something in between. Is that surrender? You wondered aloud, the question a quiet ache in your soul. Or survival? She considered this for a long moment. Then her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Both, perhaps. Perhaps the Normans conquered the land, but the land, in its own silent way, is conquering them in turn. Their children grow up hearing English from their nurses, eating English food, absorbing English ways. In 3 generations, will anyone truly remember the difference? There was profound wisdom in her observation. Already, some Norman lords born and raised on English soil identified more deeply with their birthplace than with Normandy across the sea. They spoke English alongside their native French, married into prominent English families, and slowly, subtly, adapted to English customs. The sharp distinctions of the immediate post-conquest years were, with each passing year, beginning to blur. This blurring, however, did not, and could not, erase the profound injustice of the conquest or the immense suffering it had caused. Nothing could compensate for the thousands who had died during the harrying, the countless families displaced, the ancient communities utterly destroyed. That remained a deep, festering wound in the body of the nation, a trauma that would echo through generations, a haunting presence in the collective memory. But life, stubbornly and miraculously, continued. It adapted to new realities, finding new ways forward even through the deepest devastation. The quiet, indomitable resilience you had witnessed both in exile and here, in conquered England, testified to something enduring and powerful in the human spirit itself. As harvest approached, bringing with it the inevitable time for your return journey to Scotland before winter's harsh grip made travel too dangerous, you found yourself increasingly reflective. Walking alone one evening to a quiet hilltop overlooking the village, you contemplated the sweeping arc of your life, from a simple Saxon blacksmith to a desperate refugee, then an elder of an exiled community, and now a visitor in a transformed, utterly unfamiliar England. None of it had followed the path you would have chosen. All of it had been shaped by forces vast and beyond your control. The ambitions of kings, the relentless movements of armies, the cold calculations of power. Yet, within those formidable constraints, you had found spaces for agency, for maintaining what mattered most, even as you adapted to what simply could not be changed. From this hilltop, you could see the Norman castle in the distance, its formidable stone walls catching the last, fading light of the sunset, casting long, purple shadows. Closer, the village below quietly prepared for evening. Smoke rising from cooking fires, people returning from fields with tired but satisfied steps, children's voices being called home from their play. Despite everything, life continued its ancient, comforting rhythm. Your son joined you on the hilltop, standing silently beside you for a long time, sharing the quiet beauty of the moment before he finally spoke. "Will you stay?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "There's room." Edith would welcome the help with the child. The village needs skilled hands. The question didn't surprise you. You had known your answer for some time, a quiet certainty in your heart. "Scotland is home now," you told him gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We've built a life there, as you have here. Your sister's family needs us. The settlement has become our place." He nodded slowly, having clearly expected this response, yet a flicker of wistfulness remained in his eyes. "But you'll visit again?" he pressed. "If these old bones allow it," you promised, a small smile touching your lips. "And you must bring your family north someday, so your sister can finally meet her nephew." As the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and deep violet, you both turned back toward the village. Lamps now glowed in windows, warm beacons against the gathering dusk. Your wife waited at your son's door, holding your grandson, the two of them framed perfectly in the golden lamplight. This moment, you realized, captured the strange, beautiful dual reality created by the Norman Conquest. Division and continuity, rupture and resilience, loss and unexpected renewal. Your family now spanned the border, with deep roots in both conquered England and Scottish exile. The violence of history had scattered you, yet the essential connections remained, adapting to new circumstances, finding new ways to endure. In the weeks that followed, as you quietly prepared for the long journey north, you gathered small, precious tokens to bring back to Scotland. A smooth, gray stone from English soil for your grandson, as promised. Seeds from local plants for your daughter's garden, promising new life. A small pouch of earth from the village where your son now lived, a tangible piece of this transformed homeland. These physical connections between your two worlds felt profoundly important, a way of maintaining continuity and belonging despite the vast physical separation. The day of departure arrived with autumn's first crisp chill, a clear, bright morning. Your son accompanied you for the first leg of the journey, the three of you riding in a companionable silence through countryside, now showing hints of gold and amber as the leaves began their seasonal transformation. You reached the predetermined parting place, the same crossroads marked by the ancient stone where he had met you months earlier. The goodbye was emotional, punctuated by heartfelt embraces and lingering looks, but it was not despairing. You had all survived enough separations to know that connections could be maintained across distance, that absence need not mean ending. "Tell my sister that her nephew grows stronger every day," your son said, his voice thick with emotion as he embraced you one last time. "Tell her that England remembers its true self despite everything, and that she and her family will always have a place here if they choose to return." You promised to convey his message, then turned your horses northward. The journey home to Scotland would undoubtedly be more challenging than the journey south, the days growing shorter, the weather less reliable, your bodies tired from months of travel. But the knowledge of what awaited your daughter and her family The thriving community you had helped build, the rich life you had created from displacement, provided an unwavering motivation to continue each day, one footfall, one hoofbeat at a time. As you rode, your wife often fell into reflective silence, her gaze distant, contemplating the journey's profound revelations. Eventually, she shared her thoughts. "I've been thinking about what we'll tell them when we return," she said, her voice soft but clear. "About England now, about what we've seen." "And what will we say?" you asked, prompting her gently. She considered this carefully, her eyes fixed on the horizon. That England endures, though changed. That something new is emerging from conquest. Not what was, but not entirely foreign either. That life, stubbornly and beautifully, continues even after devastation. Her concise summary perfectly captured what you had both observed: the complex, multifaceted reality of England 20 years after Hastings. Not the simple restoration that some exiles still stubbornly dreamed of, but certainly not the complete erasure of Saxon culture that had once seemed horrifyingly possible either. Instead, a gradual, organic blending, an evolution towards something that incorporated essential elements of both the conquered and the conquerors. "And that's enough?" you wondered aloud, a lingering trace of your own past defiance in your voice. "It has to be," she replied simply, her gaze meeting yours. "It's what is." This pragmatic wisdom had guided her throughout your shared journey, both physical and emotional. It was the ability to accept what could not be changed while working tirelessly within those constraints to preserve what mattered most. It was an approach that had served your people well, both those who had fled and those who had, with immense courage and resilience, remained.